8 years ago, he realized that he had special abilities. He was 10 at this time, and he was in the house, playing around with his power, making items fly when his mother entered the house. Instead of praising him, his mother yells at him, telling him to stop whatever it is that he is doing. His mother then calmly talks to him, asking him if he still wants to live with his mother for a long time, and Turan says yes. Since he still wants to live with her longer, she urges him to promise not to use the power from that moment forward. She urges him not to use the power in front of people, and Turan asks his mother why he is being restricted from doing so. She asks him if he remembers the story about the noble and the knight, and he says yes. Basically, they call the people who wield special power like him wizards, whether they are nobles or knights. However, nobles and knights are different because nobles are descendants of divine people, the Freyans, who descended to save the old humans. On the other hand, knights are descendants of those nobles whose blood has been mixed with humans, which is why there is a difference between nobles and knights even amongst wizards. She then tells him that the reason he can't use his power is that he inherited the powers of his father, who is a knight. She mentions that there are many evil nobles outside the town who treat knights as their slaves. She urges him to always keep the fact that he is a wizard a secret. 8 years later, Turan is still making sure he doesn't break this promise, and he continues to uphold it because he has no desire to reveal himself as a wizard. In fact, he has no intention to descend down the mountain into the village. In the village, 2 regular kids are playing around, acting like a wizard and a monster until the village's popular grandpa, Rabus, walks up. The little boy asks him what he must do to become a wizard, and he lets him know that he can't become one just because he wishes to. Rabus explains that wizards are the apex of humanity, ones who rule over humans from the highest realm. They are basically nobles and knights who inherit the ability to use mysterious powers from their ancestors, which means the 2 kids can't, unfortunately, become wizards. One of the villagers standing behind Rabus is surprised that he could be so blunt with the kids. Just then, he tells the old man that he heard about a monster that just appeared. Rabus confirms this, saying one of the villagers, Rop, came across the monster the night before. It is said to be covered in pitch black shadow, and it was a big leopard but big as a house. However, Rabus tells them not to worry because the village chief has already gone to the city to request a wizard, and he will definitely bring one back, so that the monster can be subjugated. They are relieved to hear this, and one of the villagers tells the kids that they are not allowed to go into the forest in the meantime for their own safety. Apparently, a regular person killing a monster is practically impossible, which is why a wizard is needed. One of the villagers asks Rabus if all the villagers are aware of this fact, and he says yes. The dude then asks him if the shepherd on the hill, Turan, is aware of this. Meanwhile, Turan is chilling out on the hill, resting while using his sheep as his pillow. Turan looks into the clear sky and complains about how boring everything is because it is always the same scenery over and over again. Turan heaves a sigh of disappointment, saying he will basically forget how to talk if this continues this way. Just then, Rabus shows up on the scene, trash-talking him for sleeping when the sun hasn't even set yet. Turan ignores the old man as if he were not there, telling him to move aside because he is blocking the sun. Rabus cannot believe just how mannerless he is, and he asks him if he is still holding on to the incident from the past. Apparently, this is an incident where Rabus wanted to quietly turn the sheep into shared property after Turan's mother died. Without holding anything back, Turan lets him know that he is obviously still holding this against him. Turan mentions that he is not generous to the point where he has to share his mother's inheritance. In addition, he lets the old man know that they are not close enough to be asking him how he is faring, and he suggests that the old man say what he wants to say and get lost. Turan's cold reply gets to the old man, who wants to crash out, but Turan's expression cautions him. The old man finally reveals why he is there, telling Turan about the monster that just appeared. The old man describes how big and dangerous the monster is, but Turan is not really moved by this. Rabus is surprised that he is not surprised, even though he is the likely target in the village. Rabus admits that Turan is insanely brave, and he doesn't even know why he is that brave, but he lets him know that the village chief has already gone to the city to request a wizard. He urges Turan to be careful because he is just worried about him. However, Turan argues with the old man, saying he is not worried about him because he is actually worried about the sheep, not him. Rabus wants to crash out when he hears this, but Turan just tells him to make himself scarce, since he is done saying what he wants to. He even trash-talks him, telling him that his breath stinks so hard, leaving the old man to walk away dejectedly. Talking about monsters, they are beasts that wield mysterious power and magic. Just the same way wizards are to humans, beasts are to monsters. Turan is excited about the fact that he is going to finally see a wizard in person, but at the same time, he is not entirely sure that the wizard will be special, since it is a rural village that requested their help. Nonetheless, he is still interested in seeing one because he wants to know how strong they are. Moments later, Turan catches a sniff of blood, and he starts to trace the smell. Not long after this, he finds what is left of the old man who had just come to tell him to be careful. He has been torn apart like paper, and Turan is surprised that the old man just came to warn him, but he was the one who died first. Turan retains his cold, expressionless face while observing the body. He figures out that it wasn't a regular wild animal that killed the old man, which means it is the monster that did it. He hasn't finished making his deduction when the culprit emerges from the forest and the monster is just as it was described. It has a dark aura around it, and it looks really big with a fierce, scary face. When talking about monsters, they are considered to be so insanely strong that normal humans can't even handle them. Rap's son hears this and believes that their village is done for, but his father assures him that the wizard would subjugate the monster. He lets the little dude know that the wizard would not lose against the monster because they can take care of monsters with a single word. Now that Turan is facing off against the monster, there is no iota of fear in him as he calmly tells the monster to die. A huge wave hits the monster, sending it backwards, but the monster remains strong as before. Turan remains speechless since his first attack didn't work, and while he is busy racking his brain for something else, the monster leaps toward him. Turan uses another command word, telling the monster to stop, but the monster barely misses him. Turan is surprised that the 2 command words he has used have been ineffective against the monster, and before he knows it, the monster angrily turns around to attack him. Turan leaps backward to dodge the monster's attack, and he decides to get serious. Turan turns to the shepherd's way, and he whips out his sling. He places the stone in the sling and uses magic to harden it before sending it toward the monster. As it travels toward the monster, he uses another command word to make it even faster. As the projectile gets closer to the monster, Turan orders it to pierce through, and this generates a massive force with shockwaves behind it that travels through the monster's body. But this is not enough to kill the monster. The monster dashes toward Turan, but little does it know that Turan is not done because the projectile is already traveling back like a boomerang, aiming for its head. With a powerful and insane force, the stone cuts through the monster's head from behind before it can even get to Turan. With the insane force that the projectile moved with, the monster crashed to the ground dead, and Turan remained really calm during the whole thing. He decides to just dump the monster's body in the valley, while thinking about how the villagers just like to stress him. The next morning, Turan receives an unexpected visit from a bunch of angry villagers. They bang on his door with no courtesy, demanding that he come out. Apparently they are there to accuse him of killing Rubus, and the dude leading the charge grabs Turan by the collar, telling him that he is shameless. He claims that Turan hurt Rubus before throwing him out to be eaten by monsters. Turan calmly replies that he can understand why they would want to frame him, because the oldest man in the village died alone, instead of the young men who were too scared to fight the monster. Turan says they are choosing to frame him because it is the easiest way for them to shift blame from themselves to him. This really pisses off the dude, and he throws a punch at Turan's face, but he easily dodges the attack. Turan then launches a counterattack, headbutting the dude, causing his nose to bleed out like crazy. Deep down, Turan is pleased that he has magic because it makes everything really convenient. This is because if he wishes for something, it happens at the cost of mana. One of the attackers comes rushing at Turan, aiming to hit him with a stick. But Turan subtly whispers, telling him to fall over. His wish comes through, and the dude suddenly trips before getting to Turan. Turan continues toying around with the rest because he doesn't even need to do anything too serious to take them down. All he plans to do is deal with them well enough for them not to die. Turan soon grabs the stick from one dude and hits him in the face with it, while still using the dude as a shield to get hit by the others. In the end, Turan easily takes all of them while still hiding the fact that he is a wizard. After beating them all up, Turan berates them, telling them that they should have used the same strength that they used in fighting him to organize Rubus's funeral. After beating up the men, Turan asks the ladies with them if they are also there to fight him, but the women raise their hands, telling Turan that they want no problem with him, while telling him that they are just there to greet him. Turan doesn't really care since they don't have the guts to fight him like the men, and he tells the ladies to drag the men back down the mountain. When Turan returns inside his house, he knows that the event will not end there because they are still going to use this to rip him off when he goes to the village to trade. Nonetheless, he doesn't really care because he can just beat them until he gets a fair deal out of them. Turan believes that no troublemaker will come to disturb him again, since he has given them a good whooping already. He hasn't finished saying this when he hears a knock on the door, and he angrily flings the door open asking who it is. To his surprise, the dude standing in front of the door doesn't look like any of the villagers. Turan asks him who he is, and the man replies that he only wanted to ask a favor concerning his travels, but it appears that he caught Turan in an inconvenient moment. Turan apologizes for his rudeness, saying he had some uninvited guests earlier. Deep down, Turan doesn't even know if he responded in the proper manner since he doesn't talk to the villagers, even though his mother always taught him about manners. Trying so hard to make things better, Turan tells the strange man that he is free to come in if he is looking for an inn. Not long after this, Turan prepares what can only be considered a feast for the strange man. As they eat, they discuss along the way, and Turan lets him know that he doesn't really talk to the villagers because he was born and raised on the hill. In fact, he has been living as a shepherd all his life, and he tells the strange man that it is weird for the small town to get tourists. Surprisingly, the dude commends him, telling him that he has good manners for someone who grew up alone as a shepherd. Turan reveals that he learned from his mother, but he mentioned that she has already passed away due to an illness. The strange man makes the religious sign while assuring Turan that his mother is in heaven because she raised a good son. After they are done talking, the two get down to normal conversation, and Turan asks him what brings him all the way out there to the country town. The strange man mentions that he is on a contract because someone asked him to take care of a monster in the village, ultimately revealing that he is a wizard. Turan is shocked to hear this, and he figures out that the man is the wizard Rabus he was talking about. The wizard then tells Turan that he has a question for him, and Turan lets him know that he is free to ask. The wizard mentions that he can actually sense a monster, but he can't see one, and it is even stranger that Turan is really calm about the whole situation, even though he knows about what happened. The wizard mentions that Turan is the ideal target for the monster, but he doesn't look scared. The wizard tells Turan that he actually looks really brave for a shepherd who has never left the town, and with a calm, serious voice, the wizard asks Turan who he is. The wizard drops the bombshell on Turan, asking if he is a wizard, and this immediately sends Turan into damage control mode. In a flashback, he had asked his mother what would happen if anyone found out that he is a wizard. His mother explained to him that there are bad nobles, using shepherds like them as an analogy. She tells him that if nobles are shepherds like them, then knights are like the dogs that nobles keep. She tells him that they might tear him with love like family, but they can also sacrifice him if necessary. His mother tells him that she doesn't want this kind of life for him, and she reiterates the fact that no one can know that he is a wizard, especially other wizards. She lets him know that if they find out, they are going to take him away from her and turn him into their shepherd dog to be discarded at any moment. His mother lets him know that to prevent people from finding out that he is a wizard, he might actually have to kill people, and now, in the present, Turan is already considering this option. The wizard can see the cold expression on Turan's face, and he asks him why he is not answering the question. Before Turan can make a move to kill him, the wizard diffuses the tension, telling Turan that it was all a joke, but his cold expression has ruined it. Turan then calms down because he is also surprised, and he apologizes for this, saying he doesn't really have a good sense of humor. However, the wizard says he should be the one to apologize for flustering him. Turan smiles, telling the wizard that it is the first time for him to hear a wizard's joke, so it basically caught him off guard. The wizard then reminds Turan that they have not introduced themselves yet, and he reveals that he is Kaorn, a wanderer. The two shake hands on this, and Turan reveals his identity too. Turan reveals that he will be 18 that year, and Kjorn mentions that he will be 75. Turan is surprised by this because Korn doesn't look his age, and Korn reveals that wizards age more slowly than ordinary people. He adds that they even live longer, and Turan asks him how he ended up becoming a wanderer. Kjorn mentions that after serving the Arabian family for 60 years, he simply left and he decided to roam around without settling down in a place. Before Turan knows it, he and Kjorn have engaged in deep conversations, leaving him surprised that he can actually be that comfortable with a stranger. Realizing that it is already getting late, Kjorn tells Turan that it is time he gets going. Korn then places an Arabian silver on the table, telling Turan that it is the purest among silver coins, so it should cover the cost of the meal. Turan accepts the coin with all gratitude, while wishing Kjorn luck on his hunt. Kjorn tells Turan not to act like it is a farewell, because he might come around a few more times to mooch off on the way. The next morning, Turan heads to the field to gather his sheep, and he looks livelier than ever. It is understandable since it is his first time meeting a wizard and even having an enjoyable conversation that felt really comfortable. Turan admits that Kjorn had more humor than any adult he has met in his life. The night before, Kjorn returned with a game that he had hunted, and Turan just concluded that he is a good person. To Turan, he had always thought knights were emotionless hunting dogs used by arrogant nobles. Turan is left baffled on how he can tell Kjorn that there are no more monsters on the hill. That evening, Kjorn is seen investigating the forest, and he notices that there are traces of a battle, but he can't feel a monster's presence. He notices the stone conveniently lodged in a tree alongside the trees that have been cut down, leaving him to wonder if the monster has already been defeated. At the same time, he is curious about who might have hunted, wondering if the village chief left it to another wizard aside from him. Nonetheless, he believes that it is a relief because if someone killed the monster, the area has already become safe, which is the most important thing. Suddenly, he catches a whiff of something strange, and when he turns around, he sees the leopard monster that Turan defeated walking toward him. However, things have gotten complicated because the monster has turned into a wraith, and Kjorn freaks out because he doesn't expect someone to do something like this. While he is still trying to understand what is happening, the monster attacks him, forcing him to leap backwards. Apparently, a monster turns into a wraith if one defeats it and doesn't absorb or disperse the mana from its corpse. It is common knowledge among wizards, and he believes that everyone should know this. The monster charges at him again, but Kjorn leaps into the air to dodge the attack, and he can confirm that the person who took down the monster is a wizard, but he doesn't understand why they left it to become a wraith. He wonders if the person is a novice, but at the same time he doesn't want to believe this because there is no way a novice can take down a monster as strong as the leopard monster he is staring at. Since he can't fully understand why the monster was left to become a wraith, Kjorn just concludes that he has to destroy it. Kjorn conjures a magic arrow and fires it at the monster, but to his surprise, the magic attack is nullified. Kjorn is shocked by this because this only means the monster's mana is stronger than his. Before he knows it, the monster vanishes right in front of him, leaving him to panic because he doesn't even know what else the monster has planned for him. Suddenly, the monster appears behind, launching a powerful slash at him. Kjorn barely dodges the attack, but gets slashed, and it is at this point that he realizes that he is dealing with a monster that a mere knight cannot contend with. With his observation, he figures out that one would have to be a lower-ranked noble to have a chance. Sweat runs down his face from fear because running into such a monster in a remote village is the last thing he expected. Seeing how dangerous the situation is, Korn concludes that he is done for. But he has no intention of dying alone, as he plans to take the monster with him. He starts to concentrate all his mana into his hand, planning to stab the monster with it directly the moment it lunges at him. Just then, the monster does as predicted, and Kjorn leaps toward it too, ready to sacrifice himself to take it down. Just before the monster reaches him, a powerful magic blast appears in the distance and cuts through the monster, ultimately defeating it in one shot. Kjorn's expression shows just how relieved he is, and just then, he hears a familiar voice behind him, asking him if he is fine. Kjorn turns around in shock, expressing his disbelief that Turan is a wizard all along. Turan confirms this, and Kjorn asks him why he didn't tell him. Turan stays mute when he hears this, and Kjorn rephrases the question, asking Turan why he helped him, because he could have just walked away. Turan decides to tell him his reason, and to know this, he goes back to the night before when Kjorn returned with a wild animal he had hunted down. Turan asks him why he was playing a hero when he could earn a lot of money with his skills. Kjorn then reveals that the villagers are pitiful because they are living on the frontier with no basic protection. Turan reminds him that this isn't his fault, but Kjorn lets him know that he is a wizard who inherited the power of a god, so he believes that it is rightful of him to protect commoners. Kjorn admits that not every wizard thinks the way he does because everyone has their own thoughts and their own way of living. Now in the present, Turan tells Kjorn that everyone has their own way of living, just as he told him that night. Suddenly, the monster attacks them again, but they manage to get out of the way just in time. Kjorn then tells Turan that they can't handle the monster because it is a monster that one can't fight unless they are at least a noble. Turan tells Kjorn to leave and tell the village chief immediately so that they can evacuate, while he tries to hold down the monster. Deep down, Kjorn is worried that he stands no chance against the monster, but he still has no choice but to act his part. Just then, Turan tells him that he doesn't have to worry because if his last attack landed, then he has nothing to worry about. Kjorn is shocked to hear this because Turan is indirectly saying the last attack he used wasn't even his full strength. This leaves Kjorn in shock because Turan is basically playing on the same level field as nobles, or even higher. Kjorn watches as Turan starts to absorb the mana in the air, preparing for a devastating attack, and this is when Kjorn realizes that he is standing in front of a wizard who has the power to turn the world upside down. At the same time, Turan is willing to go all out because he is also curious about his limit. With mana overflowing around him, he is able to gather enough stones to serve as projectiles against the Wraith. Kjorn then tells him that he won't allow him to fight the Wraith alone, because, no matter how outstanding his talent is, the Wraith is a freaking tough opponent. Kjorn believes that they have to join forces, but he immediately changes his mind when Turan unleashes his first wave of attack, and he sees how deadly it is. He realizes that he is just going to get in the way, and the only thing he can do in that moment is to make Turan's talent bloom. Turan's attack leaves a powerful force, but when the dust settles, the Wraith remains active. Turan is shocked by this, and Khorne lets him know that he can't kill a Wraith with physical attacks. Turan asks Kjorn how he is supposed to kill it without physical attacks, and he replies that the only way to kill it is through fire or lightning. Turan follows Khorne's advice and tries to burn it, but this doesn't work, and Kjorn lets him know that he is getting it wrong. Kjorn cannot believe that Turan doesn't even know the most basic common sense of a wizard, because to apply a wizard's power to another living being, establishing the right process is a basic requirement. It starts to dawn on Kjorn that Turan might have been the one who killed the monster and left it to become a Wraith. The Wraith continues causing chaos in the process of trying to get Turan, but Kjorn has finally understood one truth, and this is the fact that Turan has never absorbed mana in his life. Kjorn then tells Turan not to light the fire, but he is expected to make it, then shoot it. Turan follows Kjorn's suggestion, and he starts to brew up a fire in his palm. Apparently it is normal for a wizard to make a fire, but controlling it is where the issue comes in because it requires special training. However, he is left in utmost shock when Turan conjures a ball of fire with little to no stress. Turan then unleashes the fire on the Wraith, increasing the intensity the more it touches the Wraith. The Wraith screams out in pain, and Kjorn tells him to keep increasing the mana into the fire so it doesn't go out, because he has to burn everything about the Wraith into oblivion. Turan maintains the intensity while retaining his calm expression until the Wraith is finally burned into nothing but a charred skeleton, shocking Kjorn because they just won against a tough opponent. Kjorn is rattled that a wraith that would have needed a noble was easily defeated by a shepherd from the mountains. Turan then asks Kjorn if it is over, and Kjorn tells him to absorb the mana first if he doesn't want to fight another wraith soon. Turan asks him how he is supposed to do this, and Kjorn explains that he has to imagine himself draining something inside him. Turan acknowledges this, and he stretches out his hand to do as told. Just then, the mana starts to leave the monster's body and it completely enters his body. Kjorn tells Turan that he is going to feel some sort of pleasure, and Turan admits that he didn't even believe it at first. Kjorn is forced to ask if it is really his first time absorbing mana, and Turan says yes. It turns out that after one's first awakening, mana grows slowly with age, and the best way to grow is to kill monsters or wizards to absorb their mana. However, it is more shocking that this was Turan's first mana absorption, and he is already able to handle magic at such a level. This tells Kjorn that Turan's innate potential is on a different level. Suddenly, Kjorn calls Turan's name, apologizing for his rudeness while asking him which house he belongs to. Turan simply tells Kjorn to take off his injured arm first, and Kjorn is shocked to hear this. They return to Turan's house, and after cleaning the arm and applying a bandage to it, Kjorn apologizes for stressing Turan out. However, Turan reminds the dude that he has already told him countless times that he is not from an esteemed home because he is just a shepherd who doesn't even know who his father is. Kjorn then asks him why someone as powerful as him would be a shepherd. Kjorn assures Turan that he has no intention of belittling him, but he lets him know that it doesn't suit him at all. Turan reveals that it was his mother's request, explaining to Kjorn that his mother said nobles only use wizards and discard them. After hearing this, Kjorn tells Turan that his mother was wise. Turan is surprised because he was expecting Kjorn to call his mother an overprotective person, but Kjorn lets him know that his mother was wise. He explains that wizards have great power, and this inevitably brings conflict. He explains that some years back there was a major war between great noble houses, and it was a war between the House of Arabian, which he served, and the Great House of Zahar. He reveals that so many lost their lives in this war because out of roughly 3,000 Arabian knights, more than 900 died. Unfortunately, everyone close to Kjorn was among the casualties. Kjorn mentions those who died in the war, and this includes his beloved wife and son. Kjorn reveals that he was the only one left, which is why his mother was right to an extent, because a knight's life can vanish more easily and more meaninglessly than even commoners. However, he lets him know that his mother was wrong about one thing, and this is his aptitude. Turan is confused by this, and Kjorn explains that he is a knight with average skill, but Turan was able to take down a monster that he couldn't. Kjorn lets Turan know that his potential sits with that of a noble, not a mere knight. In fact, he lets him know that his aptitude is upper tier level. Turan then tells Kjorn that his mother told him that his father is a knight, but at this point, he already thinks that is a lie. However, Kjorn explains to him that there are children worse than a knight born to nobles, while there are also incredible children on a noble level born among knights. Kjorn then tells Turan that it would be better if he leaves the hill, and when Turan asks him why, he replies that humans need more nobles and knights. Apparently, humans are not the apex predator yet because the other races that were pushed out by the gods are still watching for a chance to rise again. In the middle of this potential destruction, the nobles only keep waging war against each other. Kjorn tells Turan that this is exactly why they still need strong and kind nobles like him. Kjorn walks to the door and asks Turan if he is satisfied with living as a shepherd. Turan takes a moment to think about it, and he asks Kjorn what he can possibly gain by going down the mountain, and Kjorn replies that it all depends on what he wants. Kjorn mentions that everything from fame to family is hard to obtain, but it is left to his imagination. As Kjorn leaves the house, he tells Turan that he could become a wanderer like him, killing monsters that threaten people, or become an explorer who ventures into the unknown. In fact, he can even get himself adopted into a house and walk the path of power. Turan follows Kjorn and tells him that he is right, because it would be interesting for him to go into the world rather than herd sheep on the hill. Turan admits that for the first time, he is curious about the outside world. On the other hand, Kjorn tells him that he might already be planning an unwanted expectation, but he assures him that he is going to support him with every possibility he has. Just then, Kjorn asks him for his bloodline ability, but Turan has no freaking idea what this means. Kjorn apologizes for dumping this on him because he has totally forgotten about the part where he knows nothing about magic. Kjorn then reveals that a bloodline ability is a trait nobles inherit from their ancestor, the Freyans. He tells him that the possession of a bloodline is what separates a knight from a noble. Kjorn then asks him if there was any spell that felt unusually easy and simple when he used magic, or if he has an outstanding ability that doesn't require that he use magic. Turan reveals that he has a good nose and he is also pretty good at throwing stones. Kjorn lets him know that his sense of smell can be considered a bloodline ability, and throwing weapons is also one of House Arabian's traits. He lets him know that it is a common trait, but Kjorn tells Turan to tell him more. After revealing all of his abilities, Turan notices that Kjorn's expression looks different from before. Turan asks him why. and Kjorn reveals that he has finally figured out which house Turan is close to, and Turan asks him which house it is. With a cold voice, he reveals that it is one of the great houses, House Zahar, the one that fought a war with House Arabian. The moment Turan hears this, he immediately understands the sudden change in Kjorn's expression. Turan can't believe that he is from the same house that Kjorn hates so much. This leaves Turan wondering what he can actually say to the man at that point. He thinks of apologizing, but then it dawns on him that what happened is a result of the actions of family members he has never even met, which means that they are practically strangers. Kjorn notices the worried expression on his face, and he taps him on the shoulder, telling him not to be worried about what happened because he didn't participate in the war. At the same time, Turan tries to say something, but Kjorn lets him know that it is an adult situation. He tells him that if they try to wash blood with blood, they are just going to continue fighting forever. Turan then asks Kjorn if he doesn't have regrets about telling him to go down the hill. Kjorn admits that if Turan goes down the hill in the pursuit of power, he will inevitably end up joining the Zahar family, but he assures Turan that he trusts his character. Turan has no idea what he is saying, and Kjorn tells him that he is talking about the goodness in him, which pushed him to save him from the monster. In addition to this, Turan revealed the identity he has been hiding his whole life. Kjorn says there is the possibility that if someone like Turan rose to power in the Zahar family, he could prevent a terrible war from happening again. Kjorn then turns around to leave, telling Turan that there is no need to think too much about the whole thing, since Turan has not even decided whether to join the Zahar family or not. Turan stops him, telling him that his thoughts are now clear because he would like to go down the mountain. Kjorn commends him, saying he has made the right decision, but Turan tells him that he is not going right away, and he lets Kjorn know that he will head down once Kjorn's injury heals. Kjorn is surprised to hear this, and he admits that Turan is a good person. Later on, Kjorn sits down to explain the basics of everything to Turan, telling him that to use magic he needs mana, which is why it is referred to as the key to omnipotence. He tells Turan that it is not a truly omnipotent power as the name implies, but he tells him that to use magic he needs mana that matches it. Turan then asks for the standard for mana that matches magic, and Kjorn informs him that the difficulty of magic is largely determined by 3 factors. The first one is bloodline, the second is affinity, and the third is causality. The first one, which is bloodline, is determined by the bloodline that he was born with, and this applies to most nobles who are not knights. He makes an example of this, saying it would be difficult for Turan to heal his wounds with magic because he is not from the Ravista bloodline in the south that can even do something like this without training. As for the second one, which is affinity, Kjorn says it is more or less considered familiarity. This is the concept that a mage can easily perform tasks that they prefer or are used to. An example of this is how he made a fireball as if he was throwing a rock, and Turan confirms this, saying that if he had probably made flames, he might not have achieved the speed or firepower. The last one is causality, but he confesses that he doesn't fully understand it. Kjorn asks Turan what he thinks would happen if he tried to kill him directly using mana, and Turan replies that some light would shine from his head, and that would be it. Kjorn tells him that this is the exact phenomenon that occurs from a lack of causality. He placed his hand over a cup on the table, causing the contents to bubble. He lets him know that something like this happens when there is no appropriate cause for a desired outcome, and when what needs to be achieved is excessively difficult. Turan then replies that he has gotten the hang of the whole thing, because if he wanted to kill Kjorn, he just has to provide a cause of death that looks like creating and shooting flames instead of spending mana to wish for his death. Turan follows the same process by lighting a fire on the cup, while saying it would be more practical to kill Kjorn that way because creating and shooting fire is more natural than directly lighting one. Kjorn is pleased by just how Turan was able to explain everything, and he tells him that he could have become a professor instead of a mage. Turan tells Kjorn that he can control animals as he wishes, but wants to know why magic beasts need causality. Kjorn tells him that this is because of their mana, and the two continue having a long, boring conversation about how magic works. In the end, Kjorn tells Turan that the Zahar bloodline also has special magic, which involves being skilled in stealth and tracking. He suggests that Turan tries it out, and he agrees to this. Turan makes his wish not to be seen, and to Kjorn's surprise, Turan actually succeeds. Turan becomes visible again, and a worried Kjorn tells Turan that it's been a while since he's seen it, admitting that it is a frightening ability. He tells Turan that this was the ability that the Arabian Knights feared the most during the war. However, Kjorn lets Turan know that it is not invincible, even though it appears that it is quite powerful. Kjorn then tells Turan that he is going to teach him more magic training methods, forcing Turan to ask him if he is not teaching too much to an enemy family's mage. Kjorn tells Turan that he healed and saved him, but also reminded him that he trusts his character. Later on, Turan heads down to the village to inform them of his plan to sell the sheep and leave. In fact, he has already packed his things, and the village head freaks out, asking him why he would make such a decision without consulting them first. Turan simply tells the man to sort out a way to find a shepherd because he doesn't think it is anyone's business what he does to his belongings. However, he tells them to buy the sheep at a fair price because if they don't, he is just going to release all of them and leave. Turan says that they are free to try and capture the sheep after this, but he is confident that they are going to have a hard time doing so. The village chief is frustrated, but he knows that Turan is one who keeps his word and there is no point in irritating him. The village chief has no choice but to pay for the sheep, telling him to do whatever he wants. After this, Kaorn and Turan set out, but Turan suddenly remembers that the villager still owes Kaorn compensation, and Kaorn lets him know that he has no intention of collecting the fee because Turan was the one who subjugated the beast. Soon afterward, they come to a fork in the road, and Kaorn tells Turan that this is where they part ways. He apologizes for refusing his offer to travel together because he is more comfortable alone. Turan assures him that it is fine, but thanks him for everything. With this, the two bid each other farewell, and Turan tells him that he hopes they meet again with smiling faces. As Kaorn disappears into the distance, Turan finally realizes the deep desire that he had always had for a father figure. Turan then continues his journey, and while crossing the desert, he sees a bunch of weird people in the distance, leaving him to wonder if they are merchants who go from village to village. Turan decides to approach them to ask for directions. The group initially thinks Turan is trying to challenge them, but he tells them that he is traveling alone and needs directions to the nearest city. The man with an eye patch then tells him to follow the road that they came from, revealing that he is going to reach a city called Murai. Turan then gets out of the way, thanking the group for telling him. However, as he is about to leave, the man stops him, telling him that he can't receive the information for free because he has to give them something in return. Before Turan knows it, the group has surrounded them and they are armed. This is when it dawns on him that he is dealing with bandits, and the man with an eye patch tells Turan that he is in a wasteland where no one would find it strange that someone died. He urges Turan to take off his belongings while they are being nice to him because killing him would just give them more stress. Turan then shocks the bandits by telling them that, since they are bad guys who kill people, he might just use them for practice, and the evil smile on his face is enough to send a chill feeling down their spines. However, the bandits come closer to him, believing that he is just bluffing, but with the flick of his hand, Turan commands the wind that sends them flying. Turan is surprised when he realizes that he could whip up such a strong wind with little to no mana. The bandits groan on the ground, wondering what just hit them, and Turan brings out his water gourd. He draws water from the gourd and shapes it into arrows that he uses to pierce a bandit's body. Turan doesn't entirely feel fulfilled because he believes that throwing stones is stronger and faster. At this point, the bandit leader realizes that they are screwed, and he starts begging Turan to forgive them. He assures Turan that they are going to give him anything, but while he is begging, the others are trying to jump Turan from behind. Just as they are about to reach him, Turan stomps his feet on the ground to create sand spikes that impale all of them, shocking the bandit leader to his bones. Turan then tells the dude that he has one question for him, and the dude assures him that he is going to answer what he asks him. He asks the dude why they attacked him without a plan because just as they have seen, he could have been a wizard. The bandit leader then replies that Turan bowed his head even when they were speaking rudely to him. In addition, he bowed his head when he greeted them, so they just assumed that he was an ordinary person. Turan thanks the bandit leader, telling him that what he said has just taught him something important. The bandit leader is still asking if Turan would spare his life when he looks up to see death coming for him. Before Turan and Kaorn left the mountain, Kaorn had told Turan never to show mercy to scum like bandits because they never hesitate to hurt others. Turan understands that he cannot spare bandits because a life he spares out of pity could end up harming 10 good people. Turan then prepares to leave, and he takes the same path that the bandits were coming from. However, as he proceeds further, Turan cannot help but come to the realization that he just killed people. Even though he felt some level of guilt, he knew he couldn't spare the bandits because Kaorn explicitly warned him not to. After walking through the wasteland and thinking over and over about Kaorn's teaching, Turan finally finds himself in a new world. He is able to look from above to see the small city of Murai, and the moment he enters the city, he is blown away by the crowd because it is his first time seeing so many people in one place. Turan is stunned because even the architecture is totally different from that in the village. To Turan, he finally gets the feeling that he has come to a city. Turan then walks up to a man selling fruits, and he greets the man. The man assumes that Turan wants to buy something, but Turan tells him he is not a customer. He remembers Kaorn's words, telling him that he should look for an inn whenever he gets to a city. Turan asks the man to show him the way to an inn, but the fruit seller just shuns him off, telling him to get lost since he is not buying fruit. Turan wonders why the man is acting rude because he doesn't know if it is a rule that he has to buy fruit before asking questions. Turan then points to an apple, and he asks for the price. The seller reveals that it is 2 dupat, and Turan brings out 2 coins, which immediately tells the seller that Turan is an outsider. Nonetheless, he lets him know that it is also fine to pay with other coins. Just as he is about to pay him, Turan asks him where he can find an inn, and the man tells him to go straight down the road behind the cape shop before turning left. He says it is the building with a blue roof, and it is the biggest inn in the city. Following the dude's description, Turan arrives at the inn, and he is welcomed by the inn staff, Lena. Turan asks how much it is for a night, and the lady replies that it is 16 dupit. Turan agrees to pay, but tells the lady that there is something more that he is curious about. He asks her if there is a monster nearby with a bounty on it. Lena is initially confused by the question, but Turan is asking this because he has to kill monsters and absorb their mana. In addition to this, hunting monsters would also bring him good money, according to Kaorn. Turan notices Lena is not answering, and he asks her why. She replies that there is no such thing as free in the world, and after making her happy, she tells him to head to the city halls, but Turan has no idea what city halls are. Lena explains that this is where they handle various public affairs, and the officials who work there are employed by the city lord. However, she lets him know that it is likely closed since it is late already. However, she tells him to go to the city the next day because this is where he can find a monster bounty. Lena then asks him if he is a monster hunter, but Turan has no idea what this means. Lena explains that there is a saying that if an ordinary person hunts monsters, they become a wizard, and she assumes that Turan is trying to become a wizard. Just then, a strange dude, Madan, who is a monster hunter, shows up behind Turan, telling him that what Lena just said is a fact because he saw it with his own eyes. It appears that Lena and Madan are familiar with each other, and she is surprised that he is still alive. Madan boasts that he already told her that he is not dying until he becomes a wizard. Turan becomes curious about what Madan said, and he asks him if he can say more about it. Madan explains that since wizards get stronger by killing monsters, the same principle applies to an ordinary person who kills a monster, which means that they can become a wizard. Madan reveals that he and his crew are hunting monsters to become wizards. Turan excitedly asks them if any one of them is already a wizard, but Madan says no. He mentions that in the city, there are only the Lord's wizard and 3 under him. Since Turan said he hunts monsters, Madan berates him, telling him that his gear is way too shabby and he doesn't even have a weapon. However, Turan lets him know that he does, and he brings out his sling. Madan is impressed by how worn out the sling is because it shows that Turan has used it a lot. Turan admits that he has because it is good for firing something about the size of an egg quickly. Madan then tells Turan that he can hunt fox monsters or rabbit monsters with the sling. Madan mentions their desire to add one more shooter to the team, and he asks him if he is interested in hunting them. As expected, Turan humbly declines the offer, but thanks the dude for the consideration. Later that night, Turan retires to his room, thinking about how chaotic the day has been. He wonders what is going to happen in the future because he didn't believe that he would actually leave the village. Turan is playing around with his magic when his senses tell him that someone is around. He gets up from his bed and demands to know who is outside the door. It turns out that Kaorn had told him never to let his guard down, even when he is staying in an inn, because being in a city doesn't mean it is safe. Turan then prepares for an attack as he walks to the door to open it. To his surprise, the person standing at the door is Lena, who is asking him dumb questions as if he were asleep. Lena tells Turan that she is there to keep him warm because she thought his room could be cold. Turan is completely confused, and he asks her what she means by this. Lena touches her chest, revealing that it is exactly what he heard. But Turan remains confused by the whole thing. Lena then tells Turan that she is ready to do what he wants for a small amount of money, and Turan asks her what would happen if there is nothing that he wants. Lena grabs Turan by the shoulders, telling him not to lie because she can tell just by looking at his face. Turan's expression immediately goes cold, and this is because he remembers Kaorn warning him not to get involved with inmates since most of them carry diseases. Although wizards are resistant to diseases, the issue is that he can pass it on to another woman if he is not careful. Kaorn tells Turan not to let his desire trap him into something he will regret. Turan ends up turning Lena away and she walks off in anger. It starts to dawn on Turan that living in cities is a big deal because he had an encounter with the fruit shop seller, and he is already dealing with Lena too. Turan returns to his bed, thinking about how they put prices on little things, and this tells him that cities are really cold-hearted. Meanwhile, one of Madan's crew asks him why he wanted to recruit Turan earlier because he doesn't look like much. One of them even says Turan has a cocky mouth and he will be good as monster bait. Madan then tells his comrades that Turan reminds him of himself when he was young. Apparently, Madan was worried about the kind of weapon that Turan uses for hunting. Madan wants Turan to stay by his side so he can at least live a bit longer. His crew members cannot believe just how good-hearted their boss is, and unknown to them, Turan can actually hear them from his room. He lets off a short smile when he hears this because he realizes that the city might not actually be entirely cold-hearted, like he thought. The following morning, Turan heads to the hall where he finds a rude official. He tells the man that he wants to hunt monsters, but the man's expression and silence remind Turan of what Kaorn told him about how the world won't be kind to him. Turan asks Kaorn why the world won't be kind, and Kaorn says, because it has no reason to be. He tells Turan that the only way to get people to treat him kindly and with respect is to reveal that he is a wizard because this will make ordinary people bow their heads. The official then hands him a book, telling him to take a look at it before handing it over. Turan realizes that it is a crow monster, and the man urges him to bring the corpse back if he can kill it. The man tells him that killing the monster and not absorbing the mana will turn it into a wraith, but Turan already knows this. The official lets him know that the penalty for this offense under the city law is execution. Turan then asks the official if knights don't hunt monsters, and the man replies that knights don't have spare time on their hands to do this. Basically, a knight's job is to maintain order in the city, while hunting monsters outside the city is for people like Turan. Turan ignores the dude's rudeness and leaves to hunt the monster, but the official believes that he is just going to die. Not long after this, Turan returns with a monster crow with a big hole in its chest, leaving the officials in complete shock. They are even more surprised that Turan was able to bring back the monster's corpse pretty fast. They ask him if he acted alone, and he says yes, and instead of arguing with them, Turan just asks them for the bounty. One of them rushes to the counter to grab the money, and as he hands it over to Turan, he suggests that he get some rest because he must be tired. The officials are left in confusion because Turan killed the monster in such a clean way that almost everything is preserved. Just then, the official who attended to him earlier notices that Turan is not gone yet. He asks him why he is there, and Turan asks if there are still other monsters that are worth hunting. The officials are shocked to hear this because they can't believe that Turan still has the strength to hunt more monsters. 3 days later, Turan had defeated 30 monsters already, and Lena gave him the best dish on their menu. Lena mentions that she is pretty sure that Turan made a lot of money, but Turan lets her know that money is not his only goal. Basically, what he is after is the monster's mana, and thanks to the ones he has hunted so far, he has gotten stronger. Turan figures out that his mana has increased a lot compared to when he met Kjorn. However, he knows that there is a limit to how much he can get stronger with weak monsters' mana. Moments later, Turan has finished the food in front of him, and he even believes that someone shared the food with him, but they tell him that he ate everything himself. Turan commends the chef, telling him that the food was delicious, and the chef accepts this compliment, saying he is going to make it better next time. Turan is about to leave for his room when he is grabbed from behind by one of Midan's lackeys, who demands that Turan give them money because they heard he has been making a lot recently. Turan doesn't argue with the dude as he slaps him across the face, shocking him and his friends. The dude's friend tries to fight back by throwing a punch at Turan, but he easily dodges it and punches him in the face. The first dude rushes toward Turan with a stool, but Turan easily blocks the attack before sending the dude flying with a flicker to the head. Lena then screams at the group, telling them not to fight in the inn. Later on, Midan shows up at Turan's door, bowing his head to apologize for what happened, while telling Turan that he has already scolded the two culprits, assuring him that it will never happen again. Midan mentions that the group has been tight on money lately, and they must have gotten jealous because of the huge amount Turan is making. Midan yells at the two, telling them to apologize, and they follow their boss's orders. Turan then asks Midan if things are that hard, and he reveals that in 3 days, they might not even be able to pay the room fee. Just then, Turan hands him a money pouch, shocking Midan, who asks Turan why he is giving them the money. Turan then tells him that it is repayment for the kindness he showed when he said he was worried, which is why he wanted to bring him along. Midan is stunned when he hears this, and he asks Turan how he knows, but Turan ignores the question. However, Turan reminds Midan that nothing is free, and he asks him to give him some information. With a bright smile on his face, Midan assures Turan that he is going to tell him everything he knows because information is what he is good at. The next day, Turan heads out on a hunt, which he believes might be his last in the city because Midan already gave him information about the next city, so it is time for him to leave. It turns out that Midan gave him some really good pieces of information, and it appears that Midan is also a good man. Even though he is not as seasoned as Kjorn, this makes him purer and kinder. Suddenly, Turan catches a whiff of a strong smell, and he dashes in that direction immediately, hoping that it is not what he thinks. Turan arrives at where he caught a whiff of the smell, which is none other than blood. To make it worse, he finds the dude who fought him the day before with a bloodied body. As if this is not enough, he turns around to find Midan's body on the ground, leaving him to wonder what might have happened. Just then, one of the crew members, who is not dead yet, manages to speak up, telling Turan that it was a rabbit monster. Turan turns around to find the culprit staring at him, and suddenly, the rabbit lunges at him with blinding speed. Turan almost gets hit but manages to dodge the attack in the last second. Turan then whips out his sling and hurls a stone at the rabbit, but to his surprise, the rabbit dodges the projectile. This is when it dawns on Turan that the rabbit is already used to defending against long-range weapons. The rabbit then lunges at Turan again, but this time around, Turan becomes invisible, leaving the rabbit totally confused. Before the rabbit knows it, Turan appears behind it, and he plunges a dagger into its neck. However, the rabbit still launches a counter-strike that sends Turan backwards. The rabbit doesn't waste time before coming after Turan again, forcing Turan to go invisible again. Annoyed, the monster starts wreaking havoc wherever it thinks Turan might be hiding, cutting down trees in his path as if it is nothing. After losing its strength, it lets out a loud shriek before dying to blood loss. With the monster dead, Turan absorbs its mana, and in the process, he notices that the amount of mana that he is absorbing is different. In fact, it is more than the leopard monster that he encountered back in the village. Just then, the last dude on the team who told him about the rabbit expresses his shock that Turan is a wizard. Turan confirms this, and the dude asks him why he is hiding his identity. Turan ignores the question, and he asks the dude if they have family members to whom he can pass their belongings. The dude sadly replies that no, and this takes Turan back to the night before when Midan was telling him about the nearby great city called Orem. Apparently, Orem has a library that contains thousands of books, but not just anyone can enter the library because only wizards are allowed in. After burying the crew, Turan reveals that his decision to finally head to Orem, and he wishes Midan a perfect rest as he walks away. By the time he arrives in Orem, Turan finally understands why Murai was referred to as a small city, because Orem can literally swallow Murai up. At the city gate, he is even surprised that there are loads of people trying to make their way into the city. Turan wonders if the guards are screening for criminals, but he is not entirely surprised because it is a great city after all. Just as he is about to enter, one of the guards stops him, telling him that he can't enter because he has never seen someone wearing such filthy clothes as Turan. The guard suggests that Turan head to cover and dust himself first. Later on, Turan gets access to the city, and he heads to the giant library, which leaves him wowed. Because of how big it is, Turan concludes that it was definitely built with magic. At the entrance, he is stopped by the guards who tell him that the library is restricted to only wizards. Turan replies that he is a wizard, but this pisses off the guards, who believe that he is an impersonator. One of them stretches his hand toward Turan, and he suddenly feels something strange in his hand. Apparently, Kjorn had told Turan that wizards recognize each other because, by sensing another person's mana, they can even tell if the person is stronger than they are. The dude almost gets crushed by Turan's overwhelming force, so much so that he even falls to the ground, forcing his colleague to ask him what is wrong with him. The dude assures his colleague that he is fine, but deep down he realizes that Turan is no ordinary wizard because he is at least noble class or higher. The dude immediately gets back up to introduce himself as Kenya, a knight of House Valtas. Kenya asks Turan which house he is from, and Turan demands to know if he has to say it before entering. Kenya says no, revealing that to use the library he's going to need permission from the Master of Valtas. Kenya then reveals that he is going to contact House Valtas. Before Turan knows it, something that he thought would be a simple process has already landed him in the Valtas mansion. He is taken to a big pool where maids attend to him, washing off his body. When he finally becomes uncomfortable, he tells them to stop, asking if he can wash himself. The maids then tell him that they will be punished if they fail to properly attend to an esteemed guest. To avoid causing them problems, Turan tells them to do whatever they want. By the time they are done and Turan wears the nice clothes he was given, even the maids are left in awe of his beauty. They urge him to forgive them, but he assures them that there is nothing to forgive. However, the maids urge him to stop speaking to them casually, and Turan cannot believe what is going on. Later on, Turan meets with the rude young lady of the house, a redhead girl, Azella. Azella asks Turan what house he is from, and Turan replies that for personal reasons it is difficult for him to say. Azella is surprised by this, and deep down, she is already thinking of a devious prank, since Turan is hiding who he is. Azella suddenly unleashes her mana while telling Turan to do the same. Turan does as told, and while Azella releases a yellow aura from her body, Turan unleashes a blue aura. Their presence is so overwhelming that those who are in the room are forced to bow their heads. After the show-off, Azella commends Turan before subtly telling him to marry her. As usual, Turan's expression goes cold in shock and confusion. Even Azella's butler is forced to tell her to stop saying unnecessary things. Azella tries to do damage control by saying it was a joke, but later turns around to Turan, telling him to still think about it. After Azella is gone, Turan checks out his fingers to see that they are shaking. It dawns on him that Azella's mana is actually comparable to his own. Moments later, he heads to the Patriarch's office, where he meets the leader of the house, Rug Valtas. After their introduction, Rug says he is aware of Turan's need to use the library, and he lets him know that there isn't any amazing ancient magic in the library. In fact, he lets him know that there is no secret method for him to increase his mana, but Turan assures him that he is fine because he never wanted any of that in the first place. Rug then tells Turan that he is not going to stop him, since he still wants it, and he reveals that there is nothing inside the library that counts as confidential information related to their house. Since it has gotten late for the day, Rug tells Turan to come back the next day, and Turan assures him that he is not going to forget his kindness. The following day, the guards greeted Turan with all respect after confirming his library pass. Turan steps into the library, and he is totally blown away at how big and magnificent the library is. He is still looking around when a loli appears beside him, welcoming him to the library while revealing that he is the librarian. He tells Turan that he is now going to explain the rules of the library to him. Deep down, Turan is left in shock because he is not expecting a little kid to be a librarian. He tells him that the first rule is that he can't damage anything because if he does, he will have to pay for it. Secondly, he is not allowed to take any book out of the library. He then adds that he will be watching him while he is using the library, but Turan urges him to give him some distance when he is reading so he doesn't become uncomfortable. Since the little boy is a librarian, Turan asks him if he also reads the book in the library, and he confirms this, telling Turan that he can help him find anything that he is interested in. The librarian asks Turan if he wants romance or history, but Turan simply tells him that what he wants is to learn basic common sense about the world. Not long after this, the librarian provides a bunch of books for Turan, telling him that the books are hundreds of years old, and he believes that they won't really suit what he wants. He then provides another set of books saying they should help him. Turan thanks him for his help, and he is amazed at how incredible the books are. Turan opens a page, and it is as if he were welcomed to heaven because of how amazing it sounds. Turan immediately falls in love with the reading, and he repeats the same routine every day. Thanks to this, Turan is able to understand the world's geography, the different races in the world, and the etiquette of wizards. In fact, he gets to learn about how various items were manufactured and processed. With each piece of knowledge that he accumulated, his world, which was an unknown space, became clearer and more vivid to him. Days later, Rug invites Turan to his office because he heard that Turan has been using the library really well. Rug tells Turan that aside from the fact that he is treating him as a noble, it is also an act of goodwill to allow him to use the library. The man then tells Turan that he would like to receive payment for this goodwill, and Turan tells the man to reveal what he needs. Rug mentions that a monster has appeared north of the city, and it has been attacking travelers. Turan asks if he wants him to hunt it, and Rug mentions that 4 knights previously went to hunt it, but they never returned. This time around, he wants a noble to step in, but Valta's house can only mobilize 2 people at the moment. Turan is not entirely displeased at this, since protecting the people is what wizards do, but he feels like something is off. Rug continues by saying the northern road has been blocked, and this is an important trade route for the city, and this has been like that for 10 days. When Turan hears this, he realizes that the issue has been happening even before he arrived in the city, which is why he easily let him use the library. Soon afterward, the group going for the hunt prepares to leave the castle, and Azella is one of them. Azella complains about how insecure her father is to have sent Turan with them. Also in the group is one of the family members, Marvin Valtas. As they proceed into the forest, Marvin asks Turan if he is interested in Azella, but Turan says no, and Marvin replies that this is a big relief. Moments later, they find a wrecked carriage, which was the handiwork of the monster that they are tracking. The soldiers look around to investigate the area, but Turan is the first to catch wind of what is really happening. He tells the group that the monster they are after is a monkey, and Azella is curious to know how he came to this conclusion. Turan points to the handprint in the distance, and he reveals that the monkey must have attacked those in the carriage before heading back to the forest. Turan tells them that they should be able to find the monkey if they follow its trail. Azella reveals that she doesn't have this kind of magic, and neither does Marvin. Turan then cuts in, revealing that he is going to try to have a look. Azella is surprised when she realizes which bloodline Turan falls to, and Turan picks up a cloth from the wreckage to lock onto the monkey. Turan senses where the mana is coming from, and he points in the direction that they need to go. Not long after this, they arrive at a stream where the trail ends. He tells them that the monster must have washed off in the water, and Azella is shocked to hear that a mere beast is able to do that to avoid being tracked. Turan tries to calm them down, telling them that it might have washed off just because it wanted to. Suddenly, Turan catches a whiff of the smell again, and he screams out, telling them that the monster is behind them. Just as he said, the monster emerges behind them, and it looks terrifying. As if this is not bad enough, the monkey hurls stones at them. This travels at a great speed, cutting through the knights, but Turan is able to dodge the attack. Surprisingly, he notices that Azella and Marvin used 2 knights as a shield instead of trying to dodge the attack. Turan is extremely disappointed, and he realizes that his mother wasn't wrong at all. The monster turns around to try to escape, but Azella orders the knights to chase it down. Just as they are about to lose the monkey, a stone traveling at a blinding speed moves past Azella's head, cuts through the knight's formation before tearing through the monster's body, knocking it to the ground. Azella and Marvin turn back in shock only to see that Turan was the one who hurled the stone at the monkey with his slingshot. With the monster incapacitated, Azella unleashes her fireball magic on it, roasting it with an overwhelming firepower that almost heats up the ecosystem. Turan, on the other hand, is impressed that he finally got to House Valtas's bloodline, which is pyromaniacs. After she is done roasting the monkey, Azella admits that there was a sense of fear in her when the stone was coming toward them. While Azella and Marvin are busy teasing each other, the wounded knights are screaming for help. Azella scolds them, telling them to stop whining. There's even a dude whose entire arm got torn off, leaving the team to start rendering first aid for the wounded knights. Turan, on the other hand, is thankful that there are no casualties, and even though it was a surprise attack, he believes that they could have avoided serious injuries. He is pretty sure that Marvin and Azella are stronger than the knights, but they still went ahead to use people who are weaker than them as shields. Marvin notices the weird expression on Turan's face and he asks him what the issue is, but Turan tells him that it is nothing. Azella then tells Turan that he is welcome to absorb mana with them. Turan agrees to this and the trio surrounds the monkey to start absorbing the mana. Apparently, Turan had read in a book that even if multiple people absorb mana at once, the degree of enhancement doesn't reduce. Not long after this, Marvin and Azella stop because they are already at their limit, but to their surprise, Turan is still in the process of absorbing mana. Azella finally understands why her father told him to follow them because his level of spell proficiency and mana capacity even rivals her own. In fact, it is more surprising because Turan is a noble who hasn't even reached his growth limit yet. Later on, the group returns to the castle, and Marvin commends Turan, telling him that it was thanks to him that they were able to defeat the monster. However, Turan tries to remain humble, saying it was nothing special. In fact, he regrets the fact that he didn't notice it early, giving the monster the chance to land the first strike. In addition, Turan doesn't think the monster would have the search ability as well. They are surprised when they hear this, and Turan explains to them that different abilities awaken depending on the monster's external traits. He lets them know that the monkey they killed had big hands and big eyes, but it doesn't look like its original form. Turan believes that the monkey likely awakened an ability to throw things with great force and the ability to see far away or to see through the forest. Marvin is blown away at how good Turan is with these types of things, and Turan mentions that he looked through a monster encyclopedia at the library. Marvin is surprised by this because no one goes to the library, as it is considered stuffy. Azella admits that she went in once a long time ago because she was curious, but it was filled with difficult books, so she left without even reading half a volume. Turan then tells the two that the next time they get the chance, they should ask the librarian if there are any easy books. Azella is confused when Turan mentions a librarian because she didn't know of any librarians. Later on, Turan heads to the library, and the librarian welcomes him with great excitement. Standing in front of the librarian, Turan realizes that he made a mistake because the dude doesn't exactly look like a librarian. Turan suddenly asks the librarian how he knows his name, and this shocks him. Realizing that he's been caught, he reveals that he learned it from Turan's permit. He mentions that as long as it is around the library, he can see anything in the building. Turan then asks him how he is supposed to address him, and he replies that he doesn't have a name, so he can call him whatever he wants. Since he has no specific name, he decides to just call him the librarian, and the librarian makes the situation even more awkward with his adult talk. Turan asks him if he is from the Old Empire, and he replies that he wasn't a person to begin with. He mentions that he is basically a spirit, revealing that he and the library are one. He mentions that his current form is just a way of communication, which is the user's preference. Turan argues with him that his current form has nothing to do with his preference. The librarian doesn't want to accept this, saying he is a reflection of what Turan wants to see. Turan then confirms this by touching the librarian, and he realizes that his hand is just passing through really easily. The librarian reveals that it is frustrating that he can't physically use force on those using the library because if he could, he would have punished everyone who had taken books out of the library. Turan easily figures out that no one knows that he exists, and he replies that until that moment, no one has had the qualifications to perceive him. He mentions that his creator created him in a way that only those who are above a certain level could see him. This basically means Turan is the only one who can see him. Turan asks him what he means by this, and he mentions that he is talking about the bloodline. Turan then urges him to tell him about the bloodline, and the librarian teases him, telling him to ask his parents. Turan is forced to tell the dude that he is an orphan, and he decides to check it out for him. However, he needs his consent to examine his body, and Turan nervously agrees to this. The librarian pushes his hand into his body, and he reveals the things that Turan already knows about the pursuer and hunter bloodlines, which are traits of House Zahar. Suddenly, he reveals that there is one more, and it was mixed. He reveals that Turan is a result of two people with different bloodlines. Turan asks him what the other one is, and he admits that he doesn't know because it is still locked. Apparently, a locked bloodline isn't that rare in bloodline combinations, telling Turan that it is going to open naturally as he grows stronger. Turan finally confirms what he has been suspecting, that his mother was far too educated to be a commoner, and there is every possibility that she was a descendant of some noble. Turan then thanks the librarian for his help, telling him that he is grateful, but the librarian suggests that he stay one more month if he is really grateful. After this, Turan continued using the library, but the librarian was always by his side. Turan asks for explanations about books, and the librarian explains what he wants to know for him. In fact, he knows about knowledge that has been lost for thousands of years. At some point, he starts to teach Turan the laws of nature, ultimately blowing the dude's mind. Turan also learns about how every disease emerges from microorganisms and that the decay of living things is caused by the feeding of such germs. In fact, he was able to grasp basic principles too. Things like the refraction of light, the generation of heat through friction, and the process of how living things get injured and how they heal. Later on, he conducts an experiment on decay, and his mind is blown when he is able to get it done. Thanks to everything he has learned so far, he is able to raise his skill as a wizard. He then tells the librarian that maybe some great houses are monopolizing the knowledge because if every wizard knew this, they would lose their competitive edge. The librarian finally understands why people's level of knowledge keeps dropping as time goes on. Before he knows it, 1 month dawns on them, and Turan tells the librarian that it is time for him to leave. The librarian is surprised by this, and Turan mentions that Rug is already giving him hints to leave. The librarian is devastated by this, and he leaps toward Turan, begging him to take him along, but he simply falls through Turan's body. Turan asks the librarian if he can leave the library, but he says no. However, he assures Turan that he is going to take care of him if he stays, but Turan rejects the offer. As Turan leaves, he assures the librarian that he will come visit from time to time, telling him that there are so many books he hasn't read yet. With this, Turan packs his things, and he leaves the city. He procured a map from the library, and from this map he learns that House Zahar's base, the Enril Desert, is east of Orem. Turan decides that it is time he heads to Zahar to find clues about his parents. That night, Turan camps out in the woods because he is not interested in rushing, since the clues would have disappeared all this time if they wanted to. As he continues his journey, he also takes out monsters along the way. The next day, he spots a horse protecting its unconscious owner from 2 dark elves. The two are frustrated that they are being pushed by a freaking horse. To take out the horse, the elves use their necromancer power to raise the dead monsters in the area. Turan remains in hiding while watching the elves carry out their deed. Turan is left between helping the man or not, because he doesn't know if the unconscious man was the one who even attacked the dark elves. The elves then decide to eat the other humans that they have killed, while they find a way to take the horse out of the equation. The fact that they are cannibals immediately irritates Turan, and he activates his stealth mode. Making sure he uses the stealth very well, he hurls a stone at one of the elves, decapitating him immediately. His colleague panics when he sees his friend become headless right beside him. He quickly gathers the monsters he raised. Turan launches another attack on the elf, but the bull monster in front of him protects him with its strong head. The bull then rushes in the direction from which Turan was attacking, pulling down trees without care, but couldn't get Turan. The elf panics because he knows what a stealth user can do, but he uses one of the beasts to fish out where Turan is hiding. Turan is forced to exit stealth mode, and the elf orders the beasts to go after him. Turan conjures a fire attack and he takes out one of the monsters, but before he can even readjust, the bull dives toward him. Turan almost gets hit but manages to leap out of the way. Turan panics when he realizes that monsters are fast. He thanks his stars that he has taken out one of the elves beforehand. Suddenly, he gets bitten by one of the monsters from behind. The monster closes its jaw on its heel, and while Turan is fighting the monster off, he gets hit by the bull, sending him into a tree. Turan is slammed into the tree really hard, causing him to scream out in pain. He coughs up blood before falling on his knees in agony, and the elf tells Turan that he is going to make him suffer before killing him. Suddenly, the horse kicks the elf in the face, sending him to the ground. The elf begs for help, and the monsters immediately gang up on the horse. They totally neglect Turan, and this turns out to be a mistake, as Turan is able to launch a powerful attack that tears the elf's head off. With the elves dead, the beasts also die, and Turan falls to his knees in exhaustion. The horse walks up to him to check on him, and Turan thanks the horse for its help. Later that night, the horse's owner wakes up and he is shocked to see a stranger in front of him. Turan casually greets him, and the man demands to know who he is. Turan tells the man that he saw him getting attacked by dark elves, which is why he had to save him. The horse walks up to the man, and he pets it, while revealing that its name is Tilly. Turan tells the dude that his horse is a good horse because it understands that it has to protect its master. The dude then thanks Turan for saving him, revealing that he is Aziz of Hausberg. Turan also introduces himself before asking if there was any particular reason he came into conflict with the Dark Elves. Aziz mentions that he was simply on a pilgrimage with his retainers when he was attacked by elves without provocation. Aziz says he has always heard that other races were savages, but he never expected it to be this bad. Aziz takes a moment to cry before apologizing to Turan for showing emotions. He reveals that he lost some people who are actually precious to him, and Turan asks him if they were his family. Aziz reveals that they were knights and servants who came on the pilgrimage with him. Apparently, they raised him since he was little, so they are his family in one way or another. Turan immediately concludes that Aziz is a good person, and he asks Aziz if he knows how many dark elves attacked him because he was able to kill 2 of them. Aziz tells Turan that he has killed them all already. However, to make sure that they are not being stalked, Turan uses his search ability to scan the area to make sure that there are no more elves in the area. Aziz then asks Turan if he has any urgent business at that moment, and Turan reveals that he is in the middle of a pilgrimage himself. Aziz is surprised that Turan is on a pilgrimage, even though he is quite powerful, and he asks if Turan is the child of some great house. He also wants to know why Turan is alone, and Turan replies that it is difficult to explain, while revealing that he is not that strong. He explains that he only managed to win by ambushing one of the elves while getting help from Tilly to fight off the other. The two end up unleashing their aura to see their level of strength. When they are done, Turan is surprised to see the amount of mana that Aziz has in his mana tank. He realizes that Aziz would probably have more mana than him if he hadn't absorbed the Dark Elves' mana. Aziz assumes that Turan is noble-born and from a powerful bloodline. In addition, he is convinced that Turan hasn't even reached his growth limit yet, and this leaves him wondering why Turan is walking alone. Since Turan doesn't have a fixed destination, Aziz suggests that he come with him to the House of Berg. He assures Turan that he is going to repay him for saving his life and escorting him back safely to his house. Turan asks him how he plans to repay him, and this is when Aziz reveals that his family is a family of enchanters, vassals of Arabian, the great house to the north. Apparently, they are a bloodline that has crafted magic tools for generations, and he assures Turan that he is going to make the finest magic tool for him. Soon afterward, the two bury the bodies, and Aziz expresses his regret that he won't be able to send the bodies of his associates to their families. Turan lets him know that he doesn't have to beat himself up about this because it would be difficult to do so. Aziz then thanks him, and Turan asks why he is thanking him. Aziz replies that he is doing so because Turan isn't mocking him. Even though he is a noble, crying about the sacrifices of his subordinates makes him look pathetic. Turan is surprised by this, and he asks Aziz why he thinks this is pathetic. Aziz replies that this is basically what his father taught him. He mentions that his father says those who fall in righteous battle shall dwell in the heavenly palace with the gods, and to grieve for them would signify weakness. He mentions that a true noble must move forward, standing upon the sacrifices that have been made. However, Turan lets him know that this isn't a weakness, but kindness. Aziz then suggests that they start speaking comfortably with each other, since it appears that they are going to be traveling together. In addition, he doesn't think the age difference between them is much, and Turan agrees to this. Aziz stretches his hand to shake Turan while addressing him as a friend. Turan takes a minute to think about the whole friendship stuff, and when he realizes that it isn't a bad idea, he shakes Aziz, assuring him that he also looks forward to their friendship. Sometime later, Aziz suggests that they take a rest before they continue the journey, and he brings out a weird chest, which Turan asks him what it is for. Aziz mentions that it is a cold storage chest, and he opens it to show the several things he kept inside from the last time that he was in the city. Turan is blown away by it, and he asks Aziz if it is always this cold. Aziz confirms this, saying most foods can be stored for about a week without issue. He then shows Turan some more magic devices that he invented, like the danger alarm that warns when someone approaches. He also mentions that what he is currently wearing is a magic tool with a self-cleaning function. Turan is blown away by all of these, since magic items are not something that is common. Turan talks about how impressive the cloth is, but Aziz assures him that by the time they return to the main house, he is going to reward him with things that are far better than this. In fact, if his family is not going to allow it, he promises to make it himself. Aziz then tells Turan that he is also an impressive fellow because in their course of traveling together, he has seen him use several types of magic, from animal control to freezing, to levitation, terrain transformation, liquid manipulation, enhancement, lightning strikes, and luminescence. Aziz asks Turan if he spent his life practicing magic or if it is some kind of bloodline ability that allows him to master any magic that he wants. Deep down, Turan knows that he just has the ability to learn any magic, but he decides not to say this. He reminds Aziz that they agreed not to pry into which family he is from, and Aziz backs off, saying he was only joking because he is pretty sure that there is no way such a bloodline ability even exists. Aziz then asks Turan how old he is because he doesn't look that old, and Turan mentions that he has a month until he turns 18. Aziz freaks out when he hears this because he, on the other hand, is turning 43 that year. However, Aziz lets Turan know that the age gap doesn't matter. Aziz mentions that he should have suspected this when Turan was able to take down 2 Wraith sorcerers. It's just that he wasn't expecting that there would be 2 geniuses in the world, and Turan asks him what he means by 2. Aziz mentions that they are both similar, but the other genius has an incredible bloodline. Basically, this other genius is his cousin, Maisa. Turan asks if Maisa can also make magic tools for him, but Aziz lets him know that she is from the main house. Turan asks further what he means by the main house, and Aziz reveals that she is a princess of Arabian, and there is every possibility that she will even become the head of a great house someday. Aziz explains that, unlike ordinary houses, the heads of great houses don't easily pass their positions to their own children, because in a great house, there are easily dozens of relatives in the same generation alone. At least one of them is always stronger than the head's own child, but in this case, Maisa, the head's child, was born with the greatest talent. Apparently, after awakening her magic power, Maisa mastered all manner of combat magic in just 10 years, and as a result, she received the full support of her house. At the moment, she is just 21, and she is almost at the same level as the core members of the house. Turan is forced to ask if the house performed a funeral for her to have had much power at her young age. Aziz confirms this, saying that when their granduncle passed away, his magic power was devoured by her. Other relatives also received portions, but she took the main portion. When Turan hears this, he realizes why the great houses maintain their dominance. Soon afterward, they arrive in the Deccan Plains, which is the central territory of Arabian. Aziz then leads Turan to the territory of the House Berg, Zavalin, which is a great castle. Upon entering the castle, Aziz is welcomed by his mother and the two rush into each other's arms. Aziz starts crying because he's missed his mother so much, but Turan cannot believe that this is a 43-year-old man. Aziz's father steps out, scolding Aziz for addressing his mother as mom, but Turan can't even wrap his head around the fact that a full-grown man is acting like a child around his mother. Aziz apologizes and then introduces Turan to his parents, revealing that he is a friend from the south. He mentions that Turan was the one who saved him when he was in great danger, and without him, he wouldn't have made it back alive. Aziz's mother is surprised to hear this, since the pilgrimage route isn't supposed to be dangerous, and she asks Aziz what happened. Aziz reveals that they were actually attacked by dark elf wraith sorcerers. The woman immediately loses her composure because she can't believe that the elves have the guts to go after her child. She yells in annoyance, threatening to gather an army to go after the elves, but her husband urges her to compose herself because she is the head of the house and people are watching, especially Turan. The man then asks Turan which house he is from, and Turan replies that he cannot say. The man is taken aback by this, and Turan rephrases it, saying he was born of a commoner mother, so he doesn't even know who his father is. Aziz is shocked to hear this, and he yells at Turan, saying he never told him this. Turan replies that he doesn't think it is something worth boasting about. Aziz's mother then assures Turan that he is going to be properly rewarded for saving her son. However, she lets him know that it is going to be difficult to offer him a room in the house, but she is going to arrange the best inn for him in the city. Aziz cuts in, asking his mother why they can't host Turan at the house after he saved his life. His mother says this wouldn't have been a problem, but as it stands, there is an important guest currently staying with them. She says that regardless of the circumstances, it is difficult to bring in a stranger of unknown origin. They are about to conclude on this when a female voice cuts through the room, telling the woman that she doesn't have to worry about her because she is pretty sure that the person who saved Aziz wouldn't be looking to assassinate her. Everyone turns in her direction, and the voice turns out to have come from a frail-looking but beautiful lady wearing a long gown. Aziz expresses his shock when he sees her, and he calls her by name, Mesa, asking her what she is doing at the house all of a sudden. The moment Turan hears her name, he realizes that Mesa is the Princess of Arabian whom Aziz talked about. However, Turan is surprised at how frail and cold she looks. Aziz's mother mentions that Mesa was nearly assassinated by Zahar's vermin, which is why she came to hide at the house. Aziz is shocked when he hears that there was an assassination attempt at the main house because it is the most fortified house in the region. Mesa replies that there is most likely an insider and it is not a secret that the main house has one or two people with questionable loyalties. Mesa then says goodbye because she is tired and needs to rest. Aziz's mother then turns to their maid, Ina, telling her to show Turan the second best guest room that they have. After a restful night in a big luxurious room, Turan gets up early the next morning to have a walk in the main hall. He runs into Aziz, who is not surprised that Turan is up early because this is a normal thing for him. He asks Turan what he is doing all alone in the hallway, and Turan points to the lamp on the wall, saying he finds it interesting. Aziz then mentions that it is the magic lantern that he makes casually. He asks Turan if he wants one because there are a ton of them in the storage, but Turan lets him know that he is not interested. Suddenly, an overwhelming light hits the two from the window, which immediately catches their attention. Aziz tells Turan that Mesa is the one practicing her magic. Seeing the immense golden lightning in the distance, Turan asks Aziz if this is the Arabian bloodline magic, and Aziz confirms this, saying it is a storm bloodline. Aziz says he has never hated his own bloodline, but he has to admit that Mesa at this point is becoming a literal god. This leaves Turan curious to see how strong the next Arabian leader is going to be. Aziz asks him if he wants to see Mesa train, and Turan admits that he is curious, but he doesn't think it is a good idea for a suspicious outsider like him to approach. Aziz says this doesn't matter since he can vouch for Turan that he is not an assassin. In fact, he is even curious to know who is stronger between him and Mesa. Turan immediately figures out that this is the main reason Aziz brought him. Aziz admits that there is a grudge he has been holding onto for a few years, and he would like to see Mesa frustrated even if it is once. Aziz then takes Turan to where Mesa is, and Turan introduces himself to her. Mesa asks the two why they have suddenly come to her, and Aziz says they plan to join her in training. Aziz reminds Mesa that they used to do this in the past, and Mesa dunks on him, reminding him how he stormed out crying after she learned a spell that took him 1 week to learn in 2 tries. Turan almost chokes on his laughter, but keeps it to himself. Aziz then shifts the conversation from himself, telling Mesa that among the people he's met, Turan also has a magic talent that is second to none. Aziz suggests that they have a duel, and the moment Mesa hears this, she loses it. She unleashes so much magic power that it changes the sky and releases a scary aura that shakes Turan to his bones. After she is done showing off her power, Turan is left sweating in shock, and with this, Mesa lets him know that he is no match for her whatsoever. Turan is left speechless, and Aziz quickly comes in, telling Mesa that when it comes to mana alone, he can agree that she is far superior to Turan. However, Aziz lets Mesa know that Turan is a rare talent when it comes to learning magic. Aziz says Turan can learn magic more than anyone he has met in his life, clearly poking Mesa's ego. Mesa then suggests that they see what Turan is capable of since Aziz is bragging all about him. Turan suggests that they each show a magic that the other doesn't know, and whoever succeeds first wins. Aziz tells Mesa that this is a good idea, and Mesa agrees. However, she reveals that she is going to leave out her unique magic to make things fair. Mesa then makes the first move, and she slightly stomps her feet on the ground. Suddenly, vines grow out of the ground surrounding the entire area, and Mesa even grabs Aziz with the vines. She raises him and leaves him hanging in the air, revealing that the magic she used is plant creation and manipulation magic. She asks Turan if he can do the same thing, and Aziz, who is already getting dizzy, begs to be let down, but Mesa refuses, telling him to enjoy himself over there a bit because it is fun to see him struggle. Turan takes a minute and crouches to touch the ground. He knows that the magic that ignites fire only manifests the phenomenon of burning, and magic that creates water merely draws in invisible moisture from the air. Turan then says a single action word, which is grow, because he believes that following the usual principle, withering vines are the same. The magic is just to rapidly accelerate the seeds buried in the ground, which basically means it is not creation but growth. Surprisingly, vines grow out of the ground just like Mesa made it. Aziz is blown away by this, and Mesa says Turan must have figured out the magic's nature from the way he said grow. She asks him if he has seen it before, but Turan says no, and she admits that Aziz is right this time around. She finally drops Aziz, telling Turan that it is his turn to cast a spell, so that they can see what he can do. Turan holds back for a minute, thinking about what to do because he knows that using Zahar's bloodline magic would be courting death. Just then, something interesting crosses his mind and he uses animal control to call forth a rat from inside the bush. Mesa smiles, asking Turan if animal manipulation is all he wants to do, but Turan tells her that this is not the case because the rat is just the material. Turan grabs the rat and then pours mana into it, causing it to immediately rot, shocking Mesa. After wringing the rat's life away, Turan drops it, saying he is done with his example. Mesa doesn't think too much about it and decides to give it a try. She calls forth a rat and grabs the rat coldly, while the rat screams in agony. She starts pouring mana into the rat, trying to get it to decay, but the rat only screams more while clinging to life. This leaves Mesa struggling as she tries to figure out what Turan actually did because it doesn't appear to be only magic. Even Aziz asks Turan how he is able to use such creepy magic, and Turan replies that it is what came to his mind. Deep down, Turan is surprised that a prestigious family like Arabian doesn't know much about it. Minutes later, Aziz urges Mesa to concede defeat since it appears that things are not going that well for her. But Mesa screams at him, telling him to shut up because she is pretty sure that she can do it. She continues pouring magic power into the rat, trying to get it to decay. Basically, when using magic, causality is a highly complex element because whether the phenomenon the wizard is trying to trigger is a natural occurrence or not, the ability to perceive the cause of the phenomenon is a crucial factor that affects both the success rate and the amount of mana consumed. One way to compensate for insufficient causality when using magic is to pour in a massive amount of mana and make up for inefficiency with sheer mana quantity. This is exactly what Mesa is doing, as she expends so much mana that she finally gets the rat to rot. Aziz is surprised that she was able to do it, but Turan knows what comes next. Mesa holds the rat in the air, looking exhausted while boasting that she finally got it done. However, she couldn't even stand strong, and before she knew it, she crashed to the ground, passing out. Aziz rushes over to check on her, asking her to wake up. Turan wonders if she collapsed because she used too much mana, but he doesn't want to believe that she passed out from mana depletion. He believes that she is only suffering from exhaustion, since the strength to reinforce her body has vanished. From a quick observation, Turan figures out the issue, and he carries her while asking Aziz if there is a healing bloodline mage in the area. Aziz panics, saying there isn't, and Turan tells Aziz to bring water and salt to Mesa's room, while informing the adults too. Turan is surprised at how light she is because he can't even tell if he is holding a person or a baby lamb. Basically, from the start, she was barely maintaining a body that she couldn't even sustain, and since her remaining mana is depleted too, she passed out. Soon afterward, Mesa wakes up in her room to find her aunt sitting beside her. The woman freaks out when she realizes that Mesa is finally awake. Disoriented, Mesa asks Aziz's mother why she is in her room, and she mentions that Aziz said she passed out while doing magic training with Turan. The woman asks Mesa if Turan did something to her, but Mesa couldn't even say anything. The woman then says they are keeping Turan in the temple under observation, but Mesa immediately speaks up, saying what happened isn't Turan's fault. She reveals that she only made a mistake, and she demands that everyone leave the room, saying her head is pounding. Before leaving, Aziz's mother tells Mesa that she made soup, which she is going to leave in the room even if she doesn't eat. She urges her to at least eat a little because of her health. Mesa thanks her aunt, and after everyone leaves, Mesa takes the plate of soup. The moment she takes a spoonful and ingests, a traumatizing memory flashes through her head. She sees her mother and brother begging for her to help them, and not being able to cope with the trauma, she throws the soup on the ground. Mesa clutches onto the sheets before grabbing her head in frustration. Meanwhile, at the underground chamber of House Berg, the temple of the limping goddess Turan is being watched over by Aziz's uncle, who is a knight, Haram. Haram tells Turan that the doors and walls are solidified like muscles trained for centuries without a single gap. Because of this, he urges Turan not to even think of escaping, and Turan assures him that he has no interest in escaping. Haram continues talking about the temple's defenses, and at this point, Turan concludes that he is just boasting. Just then, Haram whips out his sword and he starts swinging, and Turan asks him what he is doing. He replies that he is training, and he continues swinging really hard, leaving Turan totally blown away because every motion is the minimum preparation needed for the next strike. This leaves Turan wondering if this is the efficiency of a trained body. Suddenly, Haram turns to look at Turan, and Turan apologizes if he was a distraction. However, Haram lets him know that he wasn't. He moves closer to Turan, asking him what he noticed in his movements when he was watching, and the question leaves Turan baffled. Turan replies that he believes that the movement is cool, and Haram is impressed by this. Haram mentions that most nobles dismiss weapon arts as trivial since it's easier to attack from a distance with magic. However, he believes that this is because they have weak bodies, but the mind doesn't command the flesh, so they rely on tricks. Turan says that unless the bloodline is specialized in strength, focusing on magic is more practical and efficient. However, after experiencing real combat, he says there are situations that come up where one has to face it even if they want to avoid it. Haram then hands Turan his sword, and Turan reminds him that he is keeping him there because he is a suspicious person, and giving him a weapon is a bit weird. Haram tells him that this doesn't matter because what he is holding is just an iron bar. He mentions that what makes it a sword is the body of the wielder, and with Turan's current weak body, there is no way he can cut him. Turan takes a closer look at the sword and realizes that Haram is right. Turan proceeds to try out swordsmanship, and the moment he takes his pose, he starts pouring mana into every corner of his body, including the sword that he is holding. Haram immediately yells at him, telling him that he is getting it all wrong because he is not supposed to pour mana into it. Haram then proceeds to show Turan the right pose and position while lecturing him on how to move and not to move. Turan acknowledges everything, and Haram tells him to do 10 reps while breathing into his muscles. As he proceeds with it, Haram commends him, telling him that he has a fine vessel, and if it is possible, he should wring his body dry. He says mana is mere parlor tricks because wizards have assumed that their physical abilities are guaranteed. However, this is only the minimum function that his body possesses. He mentions that a properly trained body tears through the battlefield without the need for mana, and he needs to understand the difference. Turan assures Haram that he is going to bear this in mind, and he continues swinging just as instructed. Moments later, Aziz's mother enters the room, apologizing to Turan for how she treated him. However, Turan says he should be the one to apologize, and he is thankful that Mesa is unharmed. The woman then reveals that Mesa wants to give him a proper apology, so she asks if he has a bit of time on his hands. Not long after this, Turan meets with Mesa, and Mesa apologizes for causing Turan trouble because she heard that he was locked in the temple because of her. Mesa believes that it was unnecessary, but Turan assures her that it was fine, and he says he is just glad that she is safe. Mesa then asks Turan about the magic that makes animals rot. She wants to know if it is an undisclosed bloodline magic because the mana consumption was absurd. She asks Turan if he lied to her, but Turan says no, revealing that Mesa should be able to use it easily as well once she understands the principle. Mesa understands that he is not ready to teach it for free, but she lets him know that if he doesn't reveal the method, there is no proof that it isn't bloodline magic. Turan immediately tells Mesa that he doesn't actually care if he wins or not, but Mesa is not comfortable with this because it is going to make her look bad. Mesa then decides to make him an offer instead. She tells him that if he can tell her the secret of the magic, she is going to teach him one of Arabian's secret arts in return. Since it has come to this, Turan agrees to teach her. Moments later, Turan explains everything to her, and she is surprised that the root is bioenhancement, but he used microorganisms that no one can see. Turan confirms this, and she tries it out. To her surprise, it works out pretty well, and she realizes that she lacked efficiency because she didn't know about the simple principle. Mesa admits that it is her loss, but urges Turan to tell Aziz that it was a draw because she can't bear to see Aziz getting cocky. Since he has explained to her, Mesa figures out that it is only natural that he is compensated for it. She reaches into her shelf to bring out her comb, and she brushes her hair with it. After doing this, she shows Turan how objects attract each other when they are rubbed together. Just before she mentions the name, Turan cuts in, telling her that it is static electricity. Mesa is shocked that Turan actually knows this, and she groans in frustration because it is considered to be one of the profound secret arts. Mesa then tells Turan that she is going to think a bit more about how to repay him so she can find something that he doesn't know. Mesa suggests that they train together from that moment forward until sufficient compensation comes to mind. Maisa says this is just to repay her debt to him, not because she needs a training partner. Turan agrees to this and suggests that they meet in the garden in the evening, starting from the next day. That night, the family sat down for an extravagant dinner that even Aziz was blown away by because he didn't even see something like this on his birthday. He mentions that anyone who sees this would actually believe that Arabian's head of house himself came to visit. Turan also knows that there is no way this is an ordinary meal. Aziz's mother then changes the topic to the magic tool that Aziz promised to make for Turan, asking him if he has something specific in mind about it. Turan replies that he wants something that aids in defense. He says it is easy to harm others with magic, but protecting oneself is difficult. In fact, if possible, he wants it to be able to protect him from surprise attacks. Aziz assures him that this is not going to be an issue because he has made items like this in the past. However, he doesn't have anything ready at the moment, and just then, Aziz's brother offers to make it. He reveals that he just finished a commission from the main house, so he has the time on his hands. His mother asks him how he intends to make it, and he replies that, for defense against surprise attacks, something Turan carries at all times would be the best. He mentions that he is going to embed mana into jewelry like rings, earrings, or necklaces to create a function that draws out a guardian bloodline's defensive power. The woman says this is acceptable, and she asks him for the time frame. The dude replies that this is going to take him 1 month, and Aziz's father boasts about how Aziz's brother, Mello, is a skilled wizard who is just second to him. While praising Mello, Aziz is completely overshadowed, and Turan tells them that he appreciates the help but believes that the gift is excessive. Aziz's mother lets him know that this is not excessive in any way because her son's life is not worth that little. The woman then tells Turan that for the next month he must stay as a guest at the house, so he should make himself comfortable. The next day, Turan and Aziz walk through town, and Aziz tells Turan that it appears that his mother has already taken a liking to him. He says the woman is impressed with Turan's magic talent, and in addition to this, Turan never neglects his training. After hearing all the good things the woman is saying about him, Turan says it appears that she is trying to recruit him into their house. Aziz confirms this, saying his mother gives generously to put him in debt, then introduces a pretty young lady to tempt him. Basically, there are several adults in the house who join this way. Turan hears this and admits that the whole thing is quite troubling, but Aziz assures him that he doesn't have to worry too much because the magic tool is just something nice to buy his favor, so there is no way he is going to be forced to marry even if he wants the magic tool. He concludes it with the fact that his mother is not so shameless. Aziz asks Turan if he has any other plans for the day, and Turan replies that he promised to train with Maisa in the evening. He asks Aziz if there is something wrong, and since he is free till evening, Aziz believes that they have a lot of time on their hands. Aziz urges Turan to patrol with him instead because Zavalin might not be the capital, but there is plenty to enjoy. Aziz asks Turan if he was planning on staying in his room till it is time for training, and Turan says that that was exactly his plan. Aziz refuses to acknowledge this, and he grabs Turan, dragging him along so he doesn't have a choice. He takes him throughout the city, visiting places like the casino, the food market, and even a film house. Upon entering the film house, Turan spots the poster of the character being played posted on the wall, and he is shocked to see who it is. It turns out to be Kiorn, and this forces him to sit down for the play. Surprisingly, the play is actually about Kiorn and how he is such a mighty warrior. At the end of the play, Aziz asks Turan about the play, and he admits that it was very good. With everything he heard from the play, Turan realizes that Kiorn is actually great, but his humility is unmatched. He decides that if he ever meets Kiorn again, he will ask him if the story is true. The next morning, Turan wakes up to Haram staring at him in his room. Haram asks him if he woke up well, and Turan says yes, but he would like to know why Haram is there. Haram says he noticed the day before that his vessel is pretty good, and he tells Turan to follow him because it is time to train. He lets him know that the body doesn't grow stronger by lying around unless it is taken through hell. He asks Turan if he is not interested, but Turan assures him that he is up for it. Turan knows he is going to gain more with this than just playing around. Just then, Aziz enters the room, talking about the play that he wants them to watch that day. He suddenly spots his uncle, and he comes to a halt. Haram tells him that they are going to train and asks him if he is interested in coming. Without hesitation, Aziz turns back and runs off, rejecting the offer. Turan doesn't know what is going on, and he stares at Aziz like a madman, wondering why he is acting so weirdly. However, he soon realizes why this is when Aziz takes him through an intense body training session. Turan is forced to do push-ups with weights on his back, and he has almost crumbled from the pain. However, Haram is not about to let him rest, and he tells him to keep going. After so much pain, Haram finally tells him to stop, and Turan crashes to the ground in severe pain. Haram asks Turan if it is tiring, and Turan says yes. Haram then mentions that it is good to be a wizard because an ordinary body weakens over time. But a wizard uses mana to maintain their body to remain in optimal condition. Turan is still digesting what Haram is saying when he tells him to start another rep because he must have been rested already. Turan freaks out in shock, trying to tell the monster of a man that he is still tired, but Haram doesn't want to hear this. In the coming days, Turan finds himself training with Haram in the morning while training with Maisa in the evening. Before he knows it, 3 weeks have passed already, and during one of their training sessions, Turan expresses his disappointment that he can't shoot his lightning attack straight. Turan believes that this is because he is not from Arabian, but Maisa lets him know that it is not because of this, since she has never thought of aiming lightning, too. The two are in the middle of this when a messenger arrives calling on Maisa. Maisa demands to know why he is there, since she already ordered that no one should approach her while she is recovering. The dude then tells Maisa that the head of the house has summoned her, and she demands to know what it is, promising to punish him if it turns out to be for a useless reason. The messenger reveals that dark elves are causing chaos in the south and 3 cities have been ravaged already. Because of this, the main house is assembling an expedition force, and the moment Turan hears this, he realizes that the dark elves have finally made their move. Upon hearing this, Maisa tells the messenger to pass along her message that she will return soon enough. After the messenger is gone, Maisa tells Turan that she has to go, but then she remembers that she has to pay for the cost of the corruption magic that Turan taught her. Maisa asks Turan if he knows that electricity flows through the human body, and Turan is shocked to hear this. Maisa is surprised and glad at the same time that he doesn't know this. Maisa lets him know that this is an Arabian secret teaching, and she tells him that they can call the debt settled once she teaches him the magic that she is about to. She explains that when a person sees or feels something, a tiny electrical signal is sent to the brain. If one sees with their eyes, the signals go from the eyes to the brain, and if one smells something, it goes from the nose to the brain. It is through this electricity that the brain understands sensation and sends electrical signals back throughout the body to command movement. Turan doesn't really understand this, but he is convinced that there is a reason because the library's materials were the same at first. He wants to believe that this is part of the nature laws that Arabian has passed down. Maisa then asks him what he thinks would happen if he accelerates the electricity with magic. He replies that the speed at which one perceives and reacts will become faster. Maisa confirms this, saying Turan should just become a professor since it appears that he is pretty sharp. Maisa then decides to demonstrate the magic without delay, curious to see how quickly Turan is going to learn. Moments later, Turan tries out the technique and he focuses on sensing the electricity flowing throughout his body. Once he does, he decides to make the lightning transmitted through the pathway even faster, and before he knows it, he is able to sense things in record time. Even Masa's speech appears to be slowed in his presence, and Turan is overwhelmed at how impressive the magic is. Suddenly, he grabs his head in pain, and Maisa commends him, telling him that he succeeded. However, he is currently suffering from what happens when one uses large amounts of mana recklessly. Maisa tells him that he will most likely have a headache and find it hard to adjust at first, but once he gets used to it, he will be able to maintain it for a long time. Turan admits that what Maisa gave him is far more than what he gave her. Maisa leaps into the air, and before she leaves, she tells Turan that it is an investment, since it appears that Turan has a bit of talent. She tells him that she will collect everything he owes her when he later reaches his potential, and after saying this, she flies off, leaving Turan in complete awe. Later on, Turan and Aziz head to the central city of Morgan to join the rest of the citizens to give the expedition force farewell. They even spot Maisa among the forces, and Aziz doesn't hesitate before waving to his cousin. His father is forced to grab his hand, telling him to behave like a noble for once. Moments later, they are informed that the house head is stepping in, and everywhere goes silent. Just then, Turan spots the head of the house, Badal, emerging in the distance, and he looks like a beaten old man with scars all over. Turan talks to Aziz about this, mentioning the fact that Badal looks really pale, asking if he is sick. Aziz then mentions that there are rumors that a long time ago he fought with Zahar's househead and suffered grave injuries. However, this was a long time ago, and Aziz believes that he is just being affected by old age. Badal then walks to the stage and he raises his hand. Cloud fills up the sky and the weather changes in an instant. He delivers his speech to the soldiers while his eyes burn brightly. Lightning ravages through the sky, putting fear in everyone who is present, and the citizens start chanting Arabian's praises. Even Turan is left in complete shock as he finally witnesses Arabian's strength. He can't believe that with a body and condition, Badal remains at the pinnacle of magic that can overturn Earth. Turan promises himself that one day he will also be at a level like that. Later on, Turan is given the magic item that has been made for him, which turns out to be a bracelet. Mello says that just by carrying it, Turan's physical durability will slightly increase, and when he channels mana, this increases further. He mentions that in no time it will reach a level similar to a Guardian Bloodline Noble. However, its mana consumption is severe, so he urges him not to maintain it for long. Turan is blown away by the bracelet, and he admits that it is remarkable because an item of this caliber is rare even among great houses. Just then, Aziz's mother asks Turan if he has considered joining the house. Turan thanks her for the offer, saying it is a generous one, but he is pretty sure that it is going to be difficult. The woman is not surprised by this, since Aziz already told her that Turan is someone who has much to do and cannot stay in one place. She apologizes for asking again, and Turan mentions that he is never going to forget the nice treatment he got from the woman. He lets them know that Aziz and the entire Berg family will forever be his friends. After this, Turan prepares to leave, and he runs into Haram, who hands him a dagger. Haram mentions that it is a magic tool and it has no extraordinary function, but it is pretty durable and sharp. Turan accepts the gift with gratitude while addressing Haram as his teacher. Haram smiles when he hears this, and after he is gone, Aziz places a cloak on Turan. Turan asks him what it is, and Aziz reminds him that he said he liked his clothes. He mentions that they don't get soiled easily, and they even repair slight tears themselves. Aziz then gives him shirts and pants too. Turan is overwhelmed, and Aziz laughs, telling Turan that he is a good friend. He says Turan saved his life, and by spending time with him, he has learned a bit about how one should live. Aziz then asks Turan where he is heading, and Turan replies that he just wants to keep heading east. Aziz hears this and tells Turan that he's going to find himself in Carmini. He reveals that he has been there before too, and he urges him not to take a ship if he can afford it. He says the waves are pretty bad, but Turan knows that he has no choice, because beyond those waves lies Zahar's land, the Enroll Desert, but he can't tell Aziz this. Aziz then urges Turan to survive and come back, to which Turan says, okay. Moments later, Turan heads out on the road and soon realizes that he is back to his lonesome self. Since he is alone, he decides to run instead. He dashes off at a blinding speed, going past other travelers who don't even see him. They only felt a strange presence move past them, and no one could truly catch up to him. After traveling a great distance, Turan finally comes to a halt when his nose catches a strange scent. From the smell, he wants to believe that it's from burning animal flesh, and he decides to trace it. Moments later, the scent takes him to the origin, and he is left speechless when he realizes that an entire village has been burned down. The villagers are tied to poles and are set on fire without mercy. This leaves him wondering if it was a bandit attack because there is no way the Dark Elves have the guts to come that far. He continues investigating, and he soon catches on to another scent, which is coming from a cellar. He pulls open the cellar door, and to his surprise, a young girl is hiding out in the cellar. The girl screams in fear, but Turan urges her to calm down, assuring her that he is not her enemy. He says he is there to help, and this calms the girl down a bit. Turan then walks closer to the girl, asking her if she could tell him what happened at the village. She makes mention of a wizard, but before she can complete her sentence, she passes out. Turan picks her up, and from a closer look, he finds out that her condition is not critical, which means she only passed out from exhaustion from being locked in the basement for so long. Turan decides to take the girl to safety in the meantime, and by the time he returns to the surface, he realizes that he is surrounded by a strange force that is led by a lady. She points her ice bow at Turan, calling him a murderer, while telling him to surrender, ultimately pointing to a clear case of misunderstanding. The lady yells at Turan, asking him if the tied-up corpses are not enough, and he is trying to kidnap a child, too. The lady's second-in-command also tells Turan not to make a move, and Turan tries to explain to them that it is a case of misunderstanding. The second-in-command loses his control and unleashes a fire spear at Turan. The lady in charge yells at him for being so daft because Turan was holding a child in his hand. The dude apologizes, saying he only got too nervous, which led to the accident. However, the dust clears off, and Turan remains unhurt thanks to the bracelet Mello made for him. The wizards are surprised to see this, because there is not one scratch on Turan. The lady is left wondering what Turan used, and she assumes that it is a bloodline ability. Turan then speaks up, telling the group that he didn't attack the village, letting them know that it is a misunderstanding. However, he lets them know that if they attack him again, he is not going to hold back in retaliating. The lady takes a minute to think about it, and she agrees that there is no reason for the culprit to have stayed around. In addition, sparing one child after causing such a tragedy doesn't make sense. She then introduces herself as Bison, while asking Turan for his name. Bison then tells Turan that she needs a way to trust him, even if all the evidence points to the fact that he didn't do it. Turan then tells them that they can ask the child he is holding when she wakes up because she appears to have seen the actual culprit. Bison is shocked when she hears this, since she didn't expect the kid to have seen the culprit, whom they call the Burner. Turan asks for clarity on this, and Bison explains that the Burner is a deranged wizard who burned down the village. Apparently, for the past few months, the Burner has been attacking remote villages, binding people, and burning them to death. Since there are no survivors after the attacks, no one even knows their gender. The only thing that they know is that they are called the Burner. Later on, the girl wakes up, and she explains that the Burner has a red cloak and a face with facial hair. In fact, he looks rough as a woodcutter. After hearing the description from the girl, Bison and her squad apologize to Turan for jumping to conclusions. Turan remembers what Midan said about some nobles whose eagerness gets ahead of them sometimes. Turan then tells Bison that he is not going to take offense because Bazan was concerned about the girl's safety. Turan then asks them if they are there to catch the burner, and she says yes. She mentions that now that they have a description of the culprit, she believes that they can finally catch him. She reveals that they have a natural-born pursuer among them, and Turan asks her if the pursuer is from House Zahar. He also wants to know what she is doing in Arabian territory, and Beeson quickly mentions that she is from House Carmina. Apparently, she came from Avicha, and the guys with her are her friends who are her house's vassals. Beeson reveals that the pursuer, Asha, is a descendant of the generation of their ancestors who mixed Zahar noble blood. Beeson reveals that their bloodline manifested weakly, so Asha is skilled in search magic, but lacks talent in concealment, which is why the house calls people like them the primordial bloodline. Bison then presents a request to Turan, asking if he can help them hunt down the burner. Beeson tells Turan that she is going to give him all the bounty on the burner and can even yield her own share of mana because what matters to her is her reputation. Turan then asks Bison if they have an idea how strong the burner is, and Bison says she is pretty sure that he is a noble-level wizard. Apparently, in one of the villages that he attacked, there were knights defending the village, and he killed them all. Turan is surprised to hear this, but at the same time he believes that he is the right opponent for him because low-rank monsters in the wild are no longer enough to help him grow stronger anymore. Because of this, he agrees to help them, but before they leave, they head to the nearest village, and Turan hands the girl over to an orphanage. He gives the owner a pouch full of money that is enough to take care of the girl until she grows up. The man assures Turan that they are going to do their best to take care of the girl. Turan gives the man a cold stare before telling him that he is going to come back in a few years to check. Turan's stare is enough to put fear in the man's body, and he knows that he can't even afford to mess up. Once they are ready, Asha activates her power, and she starts tracking the burner. She points them in the direction that they need to go, and sometime later, Turan asks Asha what exactly she is looking for. Asha mentions that they first found the footprints of an adult male, and by the time it led to the main road, they picked up the smell of ash. She says if the burner hasn't changed clothes, ash would still be on him. Turan is impressed when he hears this because it shows how much of a professional she is. Basically, she couldn't find him before because she didn't know the burner's gender. Just then, Asha mentions that she has found the culprit and she dashes off in a hurry, forcing the others to chase after her. Soon afterward, they arrive at the entrance of a cave and Beeson tells Turan to stay in front with her while the others follow from behind. Bison lights up the way with her magic, and as they move deeper into the cave, Beeson asks Asha if there is someone inside and she tells her that there is one person at the end of the cave. After walking for some minutes, they finally reach the end of the cave where they found the burner. The girl's description matches what they are looking at, and even Asha confirms that he is the one because she can smell everything on him. Beeson immediately aims her bow at him, asking him if he is the one who has been murdering the villagers from nearby towns. The burner acts defenseless at first, but before they know it, he unleashes a powerful fire spell on them. The firepower is so overwhelming that it pushes those who are behind Turan back. However, Turan and Bison remain unharmed, and this shocks the burner to his bones. Beeson then makes her move by firing an arrow into the burner's leg, causing him to crash to the ground in pain. The burner then does something shocking as he activates earth magic that creates giant clay arms. Turan is surprised to see this, since he assumes that the dude is from a pyromaniac's bloodline. The arms start attacking, but Turan leaps out of the way before he gets caught, and the moment he gets a straight shot at the burner, he swings his weapon sleeve at him, cutting off his arm in an instant. Turan then incapacitates him by hitting him with lightning magic that runs through the burner's body so hard that he screams in agony. Beeson finally crawls out of the earth where she was trapped, and she asks Turan if he has defeated the burner, and he says yes. He tells her to check on the others while he takes care of the situation. Turan then pours vine seeds on the ground, and he uses his magic to grow them to bind the burner. Turan uses this to seal his eyes, legs, and even hands before waking him up. The burner comes back to life and immediately tries to use magic, but Turan places a dagger to his neck, telling him not to try it unless he wants to die. The burner calms down, and he asks who they are and how they found the cave. Beeson replies that they have their ways, but she wants to know if he is truly the burner. The dude keeps mute, and Turan angrily pushes the dagger into his thigh, causing him to scream out in pain. Turan asks him why he is burning the villagers in the area to death, and he claims God told him this. He mentions that if he burns the souls and flesh of those laden with sin, he can draw closer to God. Bison and the others are shocked to hear this, and he continues by saying God taught him and others the secret way to gain bloodline power. He says that just a few more times of burning humans to death, and he would have gained the pyromaniac's bloodline. Beeson tells the burner that he is pretty insane to think he could gain an inborn bloodline that way. Turan then remembers what Madan said about ordinary people gaining power by killing monsters because he has seen several wizards do it. The burner continues rambling about how there is just a little sacrifice left and he would have gained the power of a pyromaniac. Turan figures out that the dude is not actually talking crazy, and this is because he has been able to figure out the secret of the world. Without thinking too much about it, Turan cuts the burner's neck, killing him on the spot. The knights almost throw up when they see this, and Bison asks them what the issue is. They reveal that it feels pretty awful to kill someone who is tied up and unable to resist. Bison tells them to stop saying trash, reminding them that they could have died in the cave if things had gone wrong, so she doesn't expect them to be sympathetic whatsoever. In addition, Bison says that all the people the burner has killed have been so many that no matter how much he suffers, it can never be enough. Turan then picks up the burner's book, and just from the first page, he realizes that this is enough evidence that he is the burner. Turan looks through the book and is blown away because there are combination formulas he hasn't even seen before inside the book. He wonders if the voice in the burner's head also told him this. Just then, Bison calls Turan's name, telling him that it is time for them to absorb the burner's mana. The group then gathers to absorb the burner's mana, and after this, Bison receives an award from her family for taking down the burner. Bison lets Turan know that they plan to travel around a bit more while hunting some monsters, and she asks Turan what he wants to do. She hands him the promised money, and Turan replies that he is headed straight to Avicha. Bison then reminds Turan about what she told him, and he assures her that he won't go blabbing about it elsewhere because it is going to cause great chaos even if it isn't true. With this, they go their separate ways, and Turan figures out that there is no need for him to mention that there isn't definitive proof yet. As he walks through a wasteland, he figures out that fire magic in the area appears to be weak, but water magic, on the other hand, appears to be great. This basically tells him that he is close, and in no time, he finally makes it to Avicha. Turan heads into an inn where he sees a ship captain talking to his colleague about how dreadful it is to cross Enril. In fact, the last time they went through there, the pirates almost turned his ship into a sponge. The captain even believes that if it continues this way, they're going to be paying out funeral expenses instead of sailors' wages. The captain talks about how good it would be if they could get their hands on a skilled knight. Just then, Turan walks up to him, asking him if he's heading to Enril, and the captain replies that they are leaving the next day, but their ship doesn't have enough room for extra cargo. He says taking one more person means he would have to leave a barrel of booze, and this goes against his principles. Just then, Turan places his hand on the captain's cup and he freezes it completely. The captain is left in shock when he sees this, and even the other sailors who are present almost pee their pants. They are left asking themselves what a knight is doing in such a place. Turan then tells the captain that he is free to speak comfortably because he is the one asking to be hired. The captain acknowledges and then asks Turan what brings him to the place. Turan replies that he would like to let him board a ship heading to Enril. He assures the captain that he is an employee, not a passenger, promising to fend off pirates or merfolk attacks, using this as payment for his passage. The captain then tells Turan that their ship is in a bad condition, so they can't provide a room befitting a knight's status. Turan assures him that he doesn't care about getting paid or the ship's conditions as long as he gets to the Enril desert. Since this is the case, the captain happily accepts the deal, and he welcomes Turan aboard. Meanwhile, the expedition forces taking on the elves are seen engaging in a tough battle. An exceptional knight cuts down elves like paper, but he is suddenly overwhelmed. Just as he is about to be overpowered, Mesa appears from above, turning the attacking elves into roasted meat with her overpowered lightning attack. The knight thanks Mesa for the assist, and Mesa tells him to rejoin the rest of the unit, and he dashes off to join the others. Just then, Mesa's uncle, Kadram Arabian, who is the squad's vice captain, shows up, asking her if she is fine. She assures her uncle that she is good, and Kadram urges her not to overexert herself because she is far more precious than the lives of a knight or two. Mesa lets Kadram know that she is good, as she is more concerned about the progress of the battle. Kadram says it is going pretty well, revealing that the entire area will soon be reclaimed, but they haven't found the tunnels. Mesa tells her uncle that he should let her know when they find the tunnels, promising to go there herself. After saying this, she dashes off without caring, and Kadram is left groaning in frustration because he believes that his brother raised Mesa too carelessly. He fears that at this rate Mesa is going to end up like her brother and mother. Turan, on the other hand, stands at the side of the ship, thinking about how he is going to get clues even when he arrives in the land of Zahar. Since he doesn't know his father's status, there is no way he is going to know what might happen when he gets to Zahar. Basically, the only clues he has are the few heirlooms and a portrait of his mother's face. He wonders how long it is going to take him to find information about his mother with just these things. The captain soon shows up behind him, asking him what has gotten him to stand there, thinking so deeply, and Turan replies that he is only thinking about how vast the ocean is. The captain agrees to this, and he asks Turan how he is handling the seasickness because he's heard that land folks usually get nauseous just by looking at vastness. Turan assures the captain that he is actually feeling pretty good, and the captain says he's heard about Turan's quest to learn seafaring. Turan replies that he only wanted the knowledge, and with what he's learned so far, he can say that it is pretty interesting. Just then, the alarm for mealtime comes on, and everyone sits to eat before returning to work. While eating, the chef tells Turan that it might not be the best food, but the pickled cabbage is quite important. He says this is the reason they haven't died of gum disease, and Turan asks him what gum disease is. He mentions that it is a disease where one's gums bleed and they die. However, if they eat sour food, they get better. Since fruits spoil quickly, pickled cabbage makes for the best, though the taste is bad. Turan is blown away, and he asks the old man how he knows this. The old man replies that he is pretty sure that someone figured it out at some point, and from there, it just spread. He mentions that before it was discovered, people used to eat merfolk raw. Suddenly, the alarm goes off, alerting everyone to an incoming ship at 2 o'clock. The watchman takes charge, trying to figure out if the ship is a pirate ship. The moment they learn that there are no flags flying on the ship, the chef concludes that they are pirates. The old man is pissed that they had to show up at a time when everything was going smoothly. The captain then orders the sailors to get ready for combat. The old man asks the captain if he plans on running, but the captain lets him know that they are going to catch up at some point since their ship is faster. The captain then asks Turan if he is fine, and Turan assures the captain that as long as there are no knights or nobles inside the ship, there should be no problem. The captain then tells them to steer the ship in the direction of the pirates because they are engaging in the fight. The crew members start singing Turan's praises before he has even shown them what he is capable of doing. Moments later, the pirate ship reaches them, and the pirates start yelling at the crew members to surrender so that they can spare their lives. Turan asks the old man if this is true, and the old man tells him that if throwing them into the sea after cutting off their legs counts as sparing them, then they are telling the truth. Upon hearing this, Turan leaps onto the pirate ship, and the moment he lands on the ship, the pirates immediately know that there is trouble. Turan conjures water from the ocean and starts molding it into ice spears. The pirate leader sees this and freaks out, telling his men to kill Turan immediately. However, Turan already marks all of them for death, since they have been known not to be good people. Without hesitation, he unleashes the ice spears on them, tearing through them without mercy. The pirate leader yells at his teammates, telling them to stop Turan, but before he knows it, Turan has wiped out a couple of his teammates. However, the pirate leader still believes that they can go up against Turan, and he tells them to swarm Turan because if they don't, they are going to be the ones to die. Following their boss's instructions, the pirates surround Turan, aiming to take him down at the same time. Turan then pulls in water from the ocean, and he turns it into an ice sword. The first dude that charges at him as he does loses his hand before his head even leaves his body. Even though Turan just killed their colleague in the most brutal way, the pirates seem to be hell-bent on taking him down as they all charge toward him. They lunge at him with their swords, but Turan blocks their attacks with his ice sword before slapping their swords out of their hands. Once they are open, Turan opens holes in their heads with his sword. One manages to get close enough, but Turan cuts him up vertically. He picks up a pole and uses it to impale another charging pirate. While doing this, Turan remains cool, and one of them almost gets him, but he leaps backward, dodging the strike. Turan then extends his sword to reach a greater length. One strike from this is enough to decapitate a bunch of pirates without mercy. Suddenly, one of the pirates he had already beat to the ground gets back up and crept up on Turan from behind, grabbing onto him. Two pirates decide to charge towards Turan to use this opportunity to take him down. However, the trio is met with a surprising revelation as their weapons fail to even penetrate Turan's body. Before they can get themselves back into the reality of things, Turan pushes his sword into the dude holding on to him. He cuts the hands of the other two before carving them up gruesomely. Turan then goes on the offense as he dashes toward the pirates, relieving them of their heads one after the other. Their heads fly all over the ship while their blood soaks the ship. Their screams can be heard from a distance as Turan sends them to their ancestors. By the time Turan is done, what is left is nothing but carnage. The main ship then throws anchors to draw the ship closer so that they can access the pirate ship. The crew is left in complete shock because they never expected Turan to have single-handedly wiped out the pirates. The captain even teases Turan, telling him that if he continues this way, there won't be anything left for the crew to do. The crew starts singing his praises while cursing out the pirates. One of the crew members sees how bloodied Turan is, and he suggests that he visit a physician, but Turan lets him know that there is no need for this because he is not actually hurt anywhere. Turan mentions that the blood on him all belongs to the pirates. After washing up, Turan meets the captain in his office, and he informs Turan that he has searched the ship. It turns out that the ship was a merchant vessel that went missing in Abaca some years ago. The pirates captured it and gave it a new paint so that they could use it themselves, which is something that they are used to doing. Turan then asks the captain what he plans to do, and the captain tells him that since he was the one who finished the fight himself, the ownership of the item belongs to Turan. The captain congratulates him on becoming a ship owner, and Turan is surprised to hear this. Turan then asks the captain what is usually done in situations like this, and he replies that there are several ways. The captain tells him that he can take it back to Abacha and tell the original owner that he found it, while bowing his head for a reward. However, he should be aware that the paperwork and catering to bureaucrats will take a month or two from him. The other way is to go to the Enro Desert and sell it there. However, to the captain, it is best to sell it at the Northern Sea Islands, which are along their way. He mentions that this is a neighborhood that is always desperate for ships, and the rule is to sell to the one who needs it to get the highest price. However, to move a ship as big as this will require that he mobilize some of his crewmen since he can't sail the ship himself. If he is going to use some of his men, he should be ready to pay them, and he is pretty sure that Turan understands this. While they are talking about this, the crew is cleaning up the ship, and they have dumped the bodies of the pirates in the ocean. The captain tells Turan that if he can give them 10% of the profit, they are going to help him get it to where it needs to be. Turan then proposes a better deal. He tells the captain to handle everything up to the sail for 20% of the profit, and the captain doesn't hesitate before accepting the deal. The captain mentions that he knows a few people over at the island, and he is pretty sure that they are going to get a good price. Suddenly, one of the crew members rushes into the office, telling the captain that there is a mermaid. The captain freaks out when he hears this because he can't believe that they just finished handling pirates, but are now being attacked by mermaids. The crew member then clears the air, telling him that the pirates were keeping a mermaid captive under the deck of the ship. Upon hearing this, Turan, the captain, and the old man decide to go check it out. The captain asks Turan if he would like to see the mermaid, and Turan says yes. As they make their way to where the mermaid is, Turan asks them if mermaids sell for a high price. The old man reveals that if it is a female mermaid, the rich lords on the mainland who have nothing but money and bones will pay the highest fee for a female mermaid. Just then they enter where the mermaid is being held, and they are ultimately disappointed to find out that it is a young male mermaid. The captain mentions that this will only go for a little price because the rich nobles have no interest in male mermaids unless it is a legendary royal who can transform into a fish. The mermaid hears this and yells at them, calling the captain an insolent fool for addressing him as just a male. The mermaid mentions that he is Armani, the 47th prince of North Estadale, so he wants them to show him respect because he is above them. Turan turns to the captain, asking him if Armani is seriously saying he is royalty, and the captain says yes. The captain says Armani might think it is the only way they are going to keep him alive and sell him, so he just might be bluffing. The captain then asks Armani if he can transform into a fish, and he says no. The captain asks him why he cannot, and he replies that it is because he's being restrained and out of the water, for that matter. He says he has to enter the sea and in a perfect state to be able to transform. The captain and Turan stare at each other when they hear this, since it appears that Armani is only looking for a way to escape. The captain asks Turan what he plans to do, and Turan asks if it is true that mermaids eat humans. The captain says this is true, and Turan says he has no choice but to kill Armani, since he is not worth any money. Turan says it is going to be a jackpot if what Armani said is true, but if they release him into the sea and he escapes, they are just going to look like fools. Turan then stretches his hand toward Armani as he prepares to kill him with ice magic. Armani yells at him, asking him what the hell he is doing. Armani continues begging for his life, revealing that he has never eaten a human in his life and he doesn't intend to do so. This is enough for Turan to back down, and Armani desperately tells Turan that if he spares him, he is going to give him treasure. Turan then holds back, and he asks Armani if he means what he said. Armani confirms this, saying there are treasures left behind by the Freyan gods that humans worship. Soon afterward, they arrive at a dock, and while the crew is celebrating that they have finally reached land after a long time, Turan has another plan. It turns out that he has decided to get into a boat and travel with Armani to where he claims the treasure is. Since it is not far from where they are docked, Turan mentions that he is going to leave and return that night. Moments later, Turan binds Armani's hands with chains and he puts him in a boat so that they can head to where the treasure is. Armani asks Turan if he thinks he is going to run away, which is why he puts him in chains. Armani assures Turan that he is a prince, so he keeps his promise. However, Turan ignores him, and Armani asks Turan if he is promising that he is going to let him go if the treasure is there. Turan confirms this, and Turan rolls the boat out with his magic. Armani then tells Turan not to blame him if he is disappointed after seeing it. He mentions that it is a Freyan treasure, so it is only counted as amazing by the standards of land people like Turan. Turan assures him that he doesn't care, and that what he wants is for him to lead the way. That night, they arrive at the location, and Turan takes off his shirt before diving into the water. He swims toward the location, but when he reaches there, he is left with a huge surprise, as there is a giant snake waiting for him at the supposed treasure. Before they got to the treasure site, Turan had used his search skills to make sure he was not being led into a trap, and fortunately for him, he realized that Armani wasn't taking him to a merfolk stronghold. After they docked on shore, Armani was genuinely confused, since he initially couldn't see where the treasure was, but after looking around for a while, he finally located the pond. Turan asks about the depth, and Armani assures him that it is not that deep, claiming that it is only about 300 meters. Before diving into the water, Turan proceeds to tie Armani to a tree, leaving Armani with questions. He asks him why he is tying him up when he already led him to where he needs to be. Armani points out the fact that he could easily starve to death if Turan goes into the water and doesn't come back. Turan uses this against him, telling him to pray that he doesn't die inside the water because this only spells death for him too. With this, Turan takes off his clothes and he takes a deep breath before diving into the water. As he gets closer to where the treasure is, he realizes that the giant snake has turned to stone and there is a warrior standing above it. The warrior appears to have killed the snake, but the warrior was killed by the snake's fang, which had pierced his chest. Turan moves closer to check the warrior, and he is surprised to see that the warrior's body looks intact with no signs of decay. Since the warrior also didn't degenerate into a wraith, Turan believes that he was one of the Freyans. After looking around for a while, Turan sees a compass hanging on the warrior's waist, and he takes it for himself. Moments later, he returns to the surface, and Armani excitedly asks him if he found the treasure. Turan smiles, telling him that he did, and just then, Turan notices that he can now sense Armani's presence and his internal energy, all thanks to the compass. This basically means he can now sense all beings' presence and internal energy. Turan keeps his promise and he frees Armani from his shackles. Armani is actually surprised that Turan let him go because he was expecting him to sell him off after he had gotten what he came for. Turan tells the kid that he made a promise, and since Armani didn't deceive him, he has no reason to break his word. Armani is blown away by this, and he thanks Turan for keeping his word, promising to tell his father not to touch Turan if they ever go to war with the humans. Turan still believes that Armani is just spitting trash until he dives into the water and he sees him transform. Turan finally realizes that Armani wasn't joking about being royalty. Later, Turan returns to the ship to find some of the crew being punished, and after inquiring about the issue, he learns that those who are being punished were the ones who crawled in late the night before. Apparently, they also caused trouble at the harbor tavern, which is why they are being punished for taking the captain's warning lightly. Thanks to the new item he just obtained, he could see that there was a difference in the life force of the wounded crew members. Those who have been beaten basically have their life force vanish. Turan then asks for the captain, and he is informed that he went to the island to find someone to buy the ship. Moments later, Turan finds the captain and the potential buyer. The captain introduces the buyer, Captain Samuel, to Turan, and he is a trademark captain who has also lost an arm. Samuel then tells Turan that he has agreed to buy the ship for 1,000 gold coins. Turan agrees to this, but tells them that there is a problem with it, revealing that it is going to be inconvenient for him to carry gold coins around. He tells them that it would be better if he could receive the equivalent of the money in holy relics or magic tools. Samuel then tells Turan that such precious items cannot be found in a place like that, so he has to go to Komad. Apparently, Komad is the second city of the Zahar territory, and it is ruled by House Dirman, a tamer bloodline. Samuel assures him that he would get himself a decent monster there, since he has a ton of money. Turan hears this, and he figures out that a beast that understands speech would be helpful on his journey. Later on, the ship is sailing smoothly until they spot dark clouds ahead of it, which basically spells trouble. The alarm goes off, warning everyone of the storm ahead, and the ship's master screams at the crew, telling them to fold the sails immediately. He also orders that they move the cargo inside the ship, urging them to make it a priority if they don't want to die. Before they know it, the storm gets stronger, throwing the ship around. The men working on the sails get thrown off, and one of them is sent towards the ocean. Just as he is about to be taken by the water, Turan catches him and his peers with his magic. He sets them down safely and then uses his magic to fold the sails before sending all of the cargo into the ship. Once everything is clear, he tells them to retreat into the ship. After making sure that everyone is fine, Turan checks on the crew to make sure that they are fine. The captain thanks Turan for the help, telling him that they would have sunk if they hadn't folded the sails. Turan then asks the captain if they will withstand the storm, but the captain says this is left to the ship itself and the helmsman. Turan then noticed that the crew was shivering, suffering from the cold. Turan then orders everyone to gather around him, and the captain panics when he hears this. He urges Turan to rethink his decision about starting a fire on the wooden boat because it is quite dangerous. Turan assures the captain that he only needs to make sure that the fire doesn't spread. Turan then creates a ball of fire in his hand, and after making sure it is under control, he disperses the fire, lighting up the lamps in the room. The captain and the crew are left completely speechless because this is the first time they have seen magic as sophisticated as this. Thanks to this, the crew is warmed up, and the captain watches in complete awe. This made him remember the popular saying that humans shall serve the wizard and the wizard shall reign over humans, but still care for them. Soon afterward, they arrive in the largest city in the northern Enril desert, Komad. Turan gets off the ship, and as payment, the captain gives him a bag of coins, telling him that it is his hiring fee. Turan hesitates in taking the fee, claiming that it is too much because he believes that they were only helping each other out. The captain tells him that the crew all chipped in a little from the proceeds of selling the pirate ship, and the captain urges him to take it so they don't incur the wrath of God. Turan has no choice but to accept the money, promising to treat the captain to a proper meal if they ever meet again. As he departs, the entire crew gives him a memorable farewell, thanking him for the help, while letting him know that they are going to miss him. Turan then heads into the busy city, and after a quick scan of the city, he finds a dude with an overwhelming amount of mana, which shows that he is a knight. the dude suddenly feels an overwhelming aura behind him, causing sweat to run down his face. He turns around to Turan, asking him if he is a knight of House Durman. The knight recognizes Turan's strength, and he bows to Turan, confirming the fact that he is a knight. Turan then introduces himself, revealing that he is from Abacha and he would like to see the head of the house. Not long after this, Turan is warmly welcomed into the house and is given a nice outfit to grace himself. He then meets the head of the house, Cal Durman. Durman asks Turan to introduce himself, and Turan claims that he is from House Brahms, a fallen guardian bloodline. Turan tells Cal that he is there to buy a monster because he was pointed in his direction. Cal then tells him that he will have his daughter lead him to where he needs to go. Just then, Turan asks him if he has seen someone like him before, and Cal asks him why he said this. Turan replies that he could see how he hesitated when he saw him earlier. Cal claims that it is nothing, telling Turan that he only thought he looked a bit like someone he knows. On their way to the breeding grounds, Cal's daughter expresses her surprise that Turan is moving around with so much money, even though he claims that he is a fallen noble. Since he came to get a monster, the lady asks him if it is because his guardian bloodline is perfect for the mercenary life. Unknown to her, Turan is not focusing on everything she is saying because he is busy thinking about who Cal could have seen in his face. He is torn between who among his parents Cal saw in his face. He knows he shares some physical features with his mother, but he doesn't think this should be enough for him to just recognize him out of the blue. Moments later, they arrive at the breeding grounds, and Turan is already impressed at first sight because of how spacious the entire space is. In fact, each room is designed like a special habitat for the creature being raised there. Turan spots a horse, and he asks the lady for the price. She starts by telling him that the horse is one that they have cared for carefully, so he will have to pay 4,000 gold coins if he wants to have it. Turan hears this, and his entire existence shatters right in front of him because this is basically twice his entire fortune. It finally dawns on him that he is still a poor guy, and he starts considering giving up the decision to get himself a monster. However, another problem is that he can't cross the desert carrying a big chest of money. Just then, he sees an eagle staring at him from its cage, and Turan quickly asks for the price of the eagle. The lady replies that it is 1,500 coins, which surprises Turan because it is quite cheap. Even though it is cheap, it would still drain all of his money, but Turan considers it a good deal because he has already seen the eagle's mana capacity. Turan asks for its abilities, and she replies that it is pretty smart and also flies well. She mentions that it is so smart that it has even become a problem. Apparently, the eagle has refused to listen to anyone that it deems dumber than itself. Turan then approaches the eagle, asking if it can understand him. Turan admits that the eagle is smart, but still throws a jab at it, calling it ugly. Turan then turns to the lady, agreeing with her that the eagle is smart indeed. She tells Turan that she has tried to teach the eagle how to read, but it wouldn't learn, which leaves her wondering if it doesn't want to or if it just can't. The lady says the eagle is basically a waste because it has great strength, and for its size it has been fed plenty of monster meat, which is why it should be worth more than it is if it just decided to listen. Turan then moves over to try to talk to the eagle, and the lady is still telling him not to waste his time when the eagle shocks her by pointing to Turan. Turan is surprised that the eagle wants him, and he asks if there is a reason it is picking him because he is not a special person. The eagle tilts its head to the side, and Turan asks it if it will be willing to learn if he buys it, and the eagle nods to confirm this. Thanks to this, Turan purchases the eagle, and Cal performs a bonding ritual for the eagle and Turan. After he is done, Cal expresses his surprise that the eagle listens and follows Turan. He urges Turan to take care of it, and he is about to leave when he turns back because he still has something that he wants to ask Turan. He asks him if he has any connection to Talus, and Turan is confused by the question. Cal quickly moves past it, telling him to forget that he even asked the question, but Turan already locks in on the name Talus since he is the person Cal thought of when he saw him. Turan then tells Cal that he has a question for him, and Cal urges him to go ahead. Turan then whips out his drawing pad to show Cal a portrait of his mother, Ville, asking him if he knows her. Cal takes a close look and tells Turan that he doesn't know her because there is no way he would have forgotten her, since she is beautiful. After this is settled, Turan tells Cal that he needs a moment, and Turan lets the eagle into the air. Cal asks him what it is that he is doing, and Turan reminds him that he already paid for everything, so he just wants to check the product he purchased. Turan grabs the eagle by the leg and orders it to fly. The eagle flies off, giving Turan a good ride that leaves a huge smile on his face. Later on, Turan returns from the flight to meet the rest of the family. Cal's daughter introduces him to everyone, and a certain big dude, Dolph, immediately starts taking a dig at Turan. Dolph gets up to shake Turan, and instead of a gentleman's shake, he decides to squeeze Turan's hand just to show his strength. Turan is able to withstand the squeeze, and Dolph laughs, commending him for being sturdy. One of the house ladies urges the two to stop their show of strength, revealing that she is there for the stubborn eagle. Turan reveals that he already told the eagle to fly around a bit because he must have been rusty. Turan then proceeds to call over the eagle, and in no time he flies over. The lady is surprised to see how obedient the eagle is, and she tries to touch him, but the eagle leans backward to dodge her. The lady crashes out on the eagle, asking him why he chose a fallen noble when she could have raised him better. Turan manages to pet the eagle to prevent him from lashing out at the crazy lady. After this, they sit down for dinner, and Turan learns that the Arabian subjugation force has been making waves to the west because of the Dark Elves. They have learned that the commander of the subjugation force is Maisa, and the lady expresses her genuine hatred for her, saying she hopes she dies. She continues trash-talking Maisa, but little does she know that Turan is pissed about her remarks. After they are done talking about Maisa, Cal and his people talk about how blessed Arabian is because they already have an heir, but when it comes to them, there are a bunch who are vying for the position. Cal says he really wishes Talus would make a decision already, and the moment Turan hears the name Talus again, he locks in. He turns to Cal's daughter, asking her who Talus is. She reveals that Talus is the house head's younger brother and the current second in command of Zahar, so he is basically the one leading the house. Turan then takes a moment to think about it, and the thought that Talus could be his father actually crosses his mind. Turan then makes it his hobby to teach the eagle how to write. Turan is left thinking about the possibility of dying if Talus, who might be his father, even considers him to be a stain. The eagle finishes writing in the sand and manages to write everything correctly except for the word good, which he misspells. Turan commends him, but corrects his mistake. He then asks the eagle if he has decided on a name, but he replies that he hasn't. Turan teases the eagle, which earns him a cold side-eye from the eagle. Turan then asks the eagle to tell him exactly why he chose him. The eagle writes in the sand, telling Turan that he is good and their insides match perfectly, which is why he chose him. Turan wonders what the eagle means by this. He is confused about whether it is because of the mixture of the Zahar bloodline and another house. Turan is having a moment with the eagle when Dolph shows up, telling Turan that he is going hunting and would like him to come with him. Turan rejects the offer, telling him that he is already leaving. Dolph expresses his surprise that Turan was about to leave without saying anything. Turan can see how much Dolph is struggling to act like a good guy when he is only looking to suppress him with force so he can feed his ego. Dolph offers to guide Turan on his journey, but Turan refuses, thanking him for the offer. Dolph then turns around to leave, but tells Turan to reach out if he decides to change his mind. Seeing how easily the dude is backing off, Turan figures out that there is something suspicious that he needs to worry about. When it is time for Turan to leave, he tells the knights following him that there is no need for them to escort him, but they tell him that they are under orders from Cal to make sure he gets to the city walls safely. Turan then branches off to a store to get a desert guidebook and enrolls religious texts. After he is done buying the book, he realizes that the book is endorsed by the main house, Zahar. Even though the map is lacking, he can't deny that the information in the book is quite useful. Just then, he notices that there is someone with an incredible pool of mana following him. He stops reading and then proceeds with the journey to the city gate. Upon stepping out of the city, the escorts offer their greetings and turn back. Turan then tells the eagle that he would like to walk for a bit. Turan continues treading the barren desert until late that night. When he feels like it is finally prime time for him, he speaks out loudly, telling the person following him to come out. It turns out to be Dolph, and Dolph boldly emerges from his hiding place, expressing his surprise that Turan knows that he's been following him. Turan asks him why he thinks he would prefer to walk instead of flying if he didn't know that he was being followed. Dolph then claims that he was following Turan because the desert is dangerous and only wanted to see him safely through it. However, Turan asks him the big question, demanding to know if he is after his mana. Dolph smiles evilly when he hears this, and he mocks Turan for still taking the lonely road when he is aware that he was targeting him. Dolph teases him, saying he doesn't actually know if he's brave or just plain stupid. Because of the small interaction between them, Dolph assumes that Turan is from the Guardian bloodline, and his strong suit is defense, nothing more. He then suggests that Turan hand over his mana quietly, but Turan decides to teach him a lesson for believing that he is simple prey. He orders the eagle to fly into the sky, and he tells Dolph that just as he was thinking of taking his mana, the same thought had crossed his mind. Just then, Turan activates his stealth magic and he vanishes from Dolph's sight. However, Dolph doesn't appear to be threatened by this because he believes that stealth magic only hides one's appearance, while completely exposing the person's presence. Dolph makes fun of Turan, asking him what he plans to do with his stealth. He urges Turan not to think of running because it is pretty easy for him to break the stealth magic. Things start to look grim for Dolph when he realizes that he couldn't even sense Turan's presence, which is quite weird. As if this isn't enough, there are no footprints, smell, or even sound. This is when the shocking reality of things dawns on him, but before he can move, one of Turan's projectiles hits him in the back of the head. He is still trying to figure out what hit him when another hits him in the tummy. The projectiles keep coming at him repeatedly, forcing him to quickly conjure a ring of flame around himself. Dolph believes that he can break the stealth if he lights up the surroundings. He is hoping he can just catch Turan once, but suddenly, fireballs start falling down on his location. Dolph screams as he gets hit by the fire, forcing him to start running. He puts out the fire and then increases his speed while taunting Turan, urging him to come out. With burn marks all over his body, Dolph realizes that it is better for him to run because he has finally figured out that he was wrong with his prediction that Turan was from a guardian bloodline. He has been able to confirm that Turan is from the Zahar bloodline, and fighting someone like him in the desert is just bad luck. Dolph starts dashing through the desert, aiming to outrun Turan because he is confident that he can't catch up since he doesn't have a body-strengthening bloodline like his. However, his plan goes to shit when Turan appears above him, riding his eagle. Dolph knows he is done for at this point, and Turan commends him, saying he never knew that he was that sturdy. Turan asks Dolph if he has a magic tool helping him because he should have died from his previous attacks. Realizing that he is screwed, Dolph starts begging for mercy. But Turan lets him know that he is not the one to grant him mercy. Turan decides to aura farm, and Turan then unleashes a massive fire on Dolph, leaving him completely charred as if he had been burned down by dragonfire. Afterwards, Turan notes that Dolph was stronger than expected, and wonders if it was because of his history bloodline. He admits that Dolph would have been harder to eliminate with rock slinging if he were a properly trained guardian of the Zahar family. This makes Turan conclude that he might need a stronger means of attack, like piercing magic, which can break through strong defenses. Turan then begins to consume Dolph's mana, but he suddenly notices that the mana is flowing into the holy relic, making him realize that the relic was for storing mana. Turan carefully studies the relic as he seriously wonders if he has to drink it directly just to see how it works. However, after much consideration, he decides to study it some more before jumping to conclusions, since it's an item from the Freyans. Shortly after, the eagle sets off with Turan clinging to its talons, and a few moments later, they arrive at the pyramid known as the Tomb of the Gods. Turan then heads to a nearby tavern to gather intel from a local, claiming he ran away from home and has been traveling alone. The local girl asks him if he has run into any monsters or bandits yet, and Turan replies that he has been lucky enough to have a smooth journey. He then asks her how he can enter the Tomb of the Gods because, according to the book he read, money is needed. The girl is surprised that Turan can read, which convinces her that he must be from a wealthy family. However, she informs him that he cannot enter the Tomb of the Gods right now because some powerful figures suddenly showed up about a week ago and locked down the tomb since then. She further adds that even the merchants and caravans were made to turn back without getting a single glimpse of the tomb. Turan wonders what type of powerful figures can pull that kind of power, and the girl simply points to the top as if it's a name that can't be spoken carelessly. But from that single gesture, Turan immediately figures it must be none other than the powerful Zahar family. And true to his prediction, inside the Tomb of the Gods was Purga, the most likely next head of the Zahar family, along with his knights fighting for their lives. One of Purga's aides even blamed him for dragging them into such a situation. But Purga reminds him that he tagged along willingly just to curry favor with him once he became the next Zahar househead. Purga then angrily warns him to shut his trap as he begins to curse inside his head, regretting his decision to enter the Tomb of the Gods. Purga made this stupid decision because his grandfather used to tell him stories about a hidden compartment beneath the Tomb of the Gods, which could help him become the househead once he uncovers its secret. However, what Purga didn't expect was that the hidden underground would be an impossible maze without an exit. Apparently, every year he came to the Tomb of the Gods, Purga searched like crazy. But he never found the so-called hidden underground. This made him think everything he had heard was nothing but a myth. However, after a while, he finally stumbled upon the hidden underground and thought that if he could just solve the secret behind it, then becoming the next househead would be a piece of cake. At first, Purga thought he was the luckiest person alive until he fell into a maze with endless, strange monsters attacking them non-stop. Now he regrets everything and only wishes he had known about the monsters before entering the secret underground. As more monsters close in on them, Purga asks his aide for water but learns that they have none left. Nonetheless, he urges the aide to make some water so he can at least wet his throat before another battle. Suddenly, a dark voice echoes some words in an unrecognizable language, spooking them. However, Purga realizes that he can understand the language even though it's a language he has never heard before. The aide also understands the language as he begins to translate it along with Purga and realizes that the voice was saying that the night hunter has returned to the desert. Meanwhile, back in the city, Turan is getting frustrated that the nobles have decided to monopolize the whole tomb for themselves. He had been loitering around since his arrival and feared he might meet another person who could see his resemblance to Talus of House Zahar. Determined to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention, Turan decides to lie low for a while. But just then his eyes catch something in a nearby stall, so he decides to check it out. When Turan asks about it, the shopkeeper tells him that it's called saltpeter and can only be found on the southern sea islands. He also tells Turan about the rumor that saltpeter can extend a person's lifespan when ground and eaten. Turan racks his brain to recall where he has heard about saltpeter, and after a while he finally remembers that he saw it in the Pyromaniac's book. After scanning through the book, Turan finds where it was mentioned and remembers that he gave up on researching it because he didn't have the necessary ingredients. In the book, the saltpeter was listed as an ingredient for making the spirit of fire. Considering how powerful the power Orville the pyromaniac used was, Turan decides to try the recipe. However, when he asks the shopkeeper for sulfur, another ingredient used, the shopkeeper says he has never heard of it. Suddenly, another shopkeeper lets Turan know that sulfur can only be found in volcanic regions, while another man chimes in that it is mostly used for disinfectant, so it is not common in the desert. Turan wishes he had searched for it in Kamad, but since he doesn't necessarily need to go back just to find it, he decides to find a volcano later. The shopkeepers then try to sell Turan some precious black sugar, but he excuses himself, saying sweets aren't his thing. A few hours later, Turan is seen in the desert practicing to use sand instead of his usual rock slinging. He manages to damage a large boulder with the sand bullets instead of rocks, leaving him satisfied with the results. Besides that, Turan is pleased that he can actually change the shape of the sand bullets mid-flight, which increases their piercing power. Even though it consumes a bit more mana than rock slinging, Turan is still happy that he can preserve the rest of his stones because he only has 6 processed stones remaining. He also notes that he can use the sand for binding ankles and blocking vision, so he wonders if he should practice with the sand some more by moving through it as if burrowing. Putting that aside, Turan wonders what the nobles have been doing inside the Tomb of the Gods for several days. He wonders if he should just abandon his mission for now and head to another city until they come out, but after considering it, he quickly drops the idea. He then decides to sneak up close to the tomb to take a look despite knowing he could be caught. However, Turan uses stealth mode to make himself invisible and quietly follows behind 2 guards heading into the tomb. He overhears them talking about capturing a person and wonders what they are doing that requires a person. After following them for a while, Turan finds them taking a man hostage next to a black vortex, so he quietly slips past them. The captured man asks about the vortex, but he's warned not to ask any questions. Turan notices that the kidnappers look even more terrified than the captured man. A few minutes later, the men hand the kidnapped man 2 barrels, after which they order him to enter the dark vortex. When the man obediently heads into the vortex without question, Turan realizes they're using animal control magic to cloud his mind. Meanwhile, the kidnappers worry about Purga's safety inside the hidden underground and can only hope he's fine while deciding to keep sending him water and food this way. One of them suggests contacting the main house for help, but the leader warns against it, reminding him that Purga's rivals will have a field day when they learn he's trapped in the Tomb of the Gods. Hearing this, Turan immediately recognizes Purga's name as the one who's supposed to be the next house head of Zahar. Now he finally realizes that the tomb was occupied for several days because a big shot was trapped inside. Turan then decides to enter the hidden underground to save Purga and make him indebted. He plans to use this as an excuse to infiltrate the Zahar family easily, but suddenly, out of nowhere, something forces Turan to go in, convincing him that what he wants is inside. The moment Turan steps into the dark vortex, his head suddenly becomes clearer, which makes him realize that he was initially bewitched by something, and his idea to make Purga indebted to him was a terrible idea. Turan admits that there is no guarantee that Purga is someone who repays debts, and his act of playing the hero might be met with disdain. A few minutes later, Turan finds himself face to face with Purga's group, but thankfully, his stealth mode is still active, making him invisible to them. Purga was checking out the cargo sent in by his subordinates while the kidnapped man who brought it in was almost out of life. Irritated by the noisy man sprawled on the floor, Purga orders his men to eliminate him to prevent having to waste their resources feeding another mouth. One of the subordinates immediately crushes the man with his foot, instantly ending his life, while Turan scoffs at their cruelty. However, this reinforces his belief that his previous plan to save Purga was indeed a stupid plan because there's no way a cruel person like that would repay a life-saving favor. Suddenly, Turan overhears the same unknown language from earlier, telling him that he's not the Night Hunter. Apparently, in ancient times, the Enro region was ruled by giants, and because of how enormous they were, they consumed basically everything in their path, which eventually turned the region into a desert. Since the giants required vast amounts of water every day, they decided to enslave humanity. They would pack humans in their hands and crush them to drink their blood as water. With this, they killed thousands every single day, but one night, the Night Hunter of the Freyans appeared in the region. The Night Hunter was able to slay every single giant that night, ultimately saving humans from extinction. To thank the Night Hunter, the humans offered him their 3 most beautiful girls in the land for him to take as his brides. The 3 children born to the unions inherited power that is indeed extraordinary. The first could conceal his body, the second could command shadows, and the third could create poison. After the Night Hunter finally ascended, a war of rulership broke out among the 3 brothers over who would rule the desert. The eldest, who could conceal his body, decided to leave because he didn't want to fight his brothers. However, the second and third brothers waged a brutal war against each other, and the desert basically descended into chaos, forcing countless people to fall into despair. In the end of it all, the eldest returned and took down both of his younger brothers to claim dominion over the desert, and this eldest is the ancestor of Zahar. This leaves Turan wondering why he could hear the strange voice telling him that he is not the Night Hunter. He wonders if this is connected to the Zahar nobles who had entered before him, but to be fair, he is more or less a distant relative. Just then, he notices that there is a strange being in the distance, and he moves closer with the intention of investigating. He is surprised to see a bald-headed, ugly monster that is drooling from the mouth, and he almost pukes from how despicable the monster is. Suddenly, the monster turns around to look in his direction, and this leaves Turan wondering if the monster had spotted him. He confirms this suspicion when the monster lunges toward him, and it takes a huge swing at him. Turan is forced to leap backwards before he loses his head. Before he knows it, the monster and his friends have locked in on his location, and Turan replies with a fire blast that burns them hard, giving Turan the chance to retreat. He starts wondering how the monster was able to detect him because he never thought there would be anything that could break through Zahar's stealth. However, he notices that after putting some distance between himself and the monsters, they can no longer tell where he is, which means the detection range is quite narrow. Turan then decides to strike first and hurls a projectile at the monster in the middle, crushing its head with one strike. The monster crashes to the ground headless, but surprisingly, the other two don't even react to their friend's death. After the other two have left the scene, Turan moves closer to the dead monster to try to absorb its mana, and this is when he notices something shocking. He realizes that he can't absorb mana from it, which basically points out the fact that it is a magic creature. Turan is disappointed because, with how agile the creature is, it should have contained more mana than that. In addition to this, the compass, the holy relic, didn't react to the monster's mana, leaving Turan to start wondering what the monster's true identity is. Just then, he hears the voice again, telling him that he is not the Night Hunter, as if the entire dungeon is trying to reject his presence. He catches wind of Purga coming close to him, and he quickly vanishes from the scene. The moment Purga and his entourage got to the scene, they were surprised to find a dead monster there, and one of them asked if they had passed through the path before. Another replies that it is hard to tell, since they have been going around in a maze since the moment they entered the dungeon. However, Purga is able to intuitively tell them that there is a rat in the building. One person suggests that it might be the rescue party, but Purga disagrees because they would have found each other already. Purga then tells one of his team members, Galthan, to set traps all around because they are going to catch whoever is running around the ruins. He then tells another, Imelda, to make sure that the surroundings are well lit. Purga smiles evilly, telling his men that they are going to catch whoever it is and use him as bait for the monsters. Unknown to them, Turan is right behind them, hearing and watching everything that they are doing. 3 days later, they still haven't found Turan, and in fact, the two groups have found themselves coexisting in the labyrinth. Fortunately for Turan, the traps laid by Galthan were visible to him thanks to the holy relic, so he could easily move around without being detected. To make it worse for Purga's group, some of them ended up triggering their own traps. Turan, on the other hand, was able to easily navigate his way around the labyrinth thanks to the holy relic. With this, he was able to figure out where he had been, helping him to expand his search range. Whenever he runs into a horde of monsters that he could not take on by himself, Turan would lead Purga's group to the location so that they could help him clear out the trash. Even though Turan was not able to absorb the little mana that the monsters had, Turan didn't mind since it was more or less insignificant. Later on, Turan hears how Purga and his men are talking about the men who were sent in as sacrifices for them. Purga and his boys have no sympathy for the dead, and this disgusts Turan. Just then, the group runs into another horde of monsters, and Turan sees this as the perfect chance for him to explore the deeper parts of the labyrinth while they are distracted. Soon afterward, he finds himself standing in front of a giant door that has a big eye in the middle. Turan is surprised that there is such a door in the labyrinth, and from the look of things, he figures out that it was made for the giants. Just then, the door reacts to his presence, and the giant eye looks down on him, scanning his whole existence. The eye accesses Turan's personality, and the first bloodline he notices is the hunter-pursuer, but he tells Turan that he doesn't meet the conditions with this. However, it notices another after it takes a look at the holy relic, which is the Wave Rider mimic, and surprisingly, it tells Turan that he met the conditions for this. Turan watches in shock as the eye asks him if he would like to enter the door. Turan wonders if Wave Rider and Mimic are the two bloodlines that have not manifested in him just yet. Just then, he notices that the door is staring at the holy relic, not him. He wonders if it recognized the abilities of the owner of the holy relic rather than his own bloodline. Basically, this means the door is using the abilities together with Turan's bloodline to make its judgment. Turan then decides to ask the door what Wave Rider and Mimic are. He also wants to know about the door itself. The door takes the request, and after processing it, it gives Turan the feedback that it can answer his questions. The door reveals that the Wave Rider's first type of abilities are underwater respiration, underwater physical enhancement, and fluid manipulation. As for Mimic, it includes flow detection, absorption, and imitation. Turan hears this, and he looks closely at himself, wondering if he has gained the ability to breathe underwater or manipulate fluids without knowing it. He wonders if the door only uses this for identification and not the abilities themselves. Turan then asks the door what it is, and it replies that it is the spirit of the door. Turan figures out that the door is more or less a librarian, but it appears to be more rigid and inhuman. Turan proceeds to ask the door about the labyrinth and how he is supposed to escape. The door reveals that he is inside the labyrinth of the Night Hunter, and the one who slays the chief while possessing the correct 4 types of bloodline becomes the Night Hunter. Upon hearing this, Turan wonders if this means he could become a god. The door then tells Turan that the escape route will present itself after he slays the chief. Suddenly, the door starts to display an error message. Turan watches as the door mumbles all types of wrong speeches as if it has been infected with a virus. The door soon goes from blue to red, and it immediately deploys the labyrinth's high defense, which is the chief. Turan figures out that there is something behind the door, and he takes a defensive stance in preparation for whatever it is. Just then, the giant door opens, and a huge monstrous creature with multiple hands steps out of the dark room. The monster stares at Turan and judges him on sight, telling him that he is not the Night Hunter. The chief monster tells Turan that he is a fake and therefore he must die. Turan takes the initiative to attack first, and he unleashes a barrage of attacks on the monster, but by the time he is done, the monster smiles mockingly while telling him that his attacks only tickled him. Seeing how insane the creature is, Turan turns around and dashes out of there because it is pretty clear that he has no chance one-on-one. However, the monster chases after him, screaming at him to stop right where he is. The other minions converge on Turan, and it turns into a full-blown chase from there on out. They surround Turan and almost grab him, but his agility helps him leap out of the situation. Turan jumps over the monsters, escaping the entire horde, but while he is still celebrating his escape, the chief monster has already appeared before him. Before he knows what is happening, another monster appears before him and takes a huge swing at him. The massive attack almost destroys his shield, and Turan reacts to this instantly by whipping out his blade and severing the monster's head. Turan continues running while wondering who could have built the labyrinth and why they did it. Suddenly, the chief monster appears right beside him, and Turan's hope of running side by side with it is dashed when the monster takes a huge swing at him. This forces Turan to make a quick turn backwards, and he continues his run. However, he already figured out that the creature will only chase him till either one of them dies. Turan then decides to use Purga and his group once again because there is strength in numbers, they say. Turan rushes in his cousin's direction, and the group has just finished fighting a horde of monsters when Purga notices that something huge is coming towards them. They hear the chief monster muttering words that they can't understand, and seeing how the chief monster is insanely charging towards them. Purga screams at his subordinates, telling them to forget about trying to decipher whatever it is that the monster said. Galthan and Ubo are the first victims as the chief monster impales them with its giant claws, shredding them on the spot. Purga screams out in agony as he watches his comrades get crushed. One of his men angrily lunges towards the chief monster, but he is swatted and crushed like a fly. The chief monster continues running through them like butter, forcing the group to push themselves to the max. One of them is still cooking up a powerful fire attack when the monster steps on him, crushing him on the spot. The monster basically slaps them around to crush them, and while he is busy doing this, the minions are also causing a nuisance. Purga panics because he can see all of them dying with the way things are going. Just then, he spots Turan in the distance, running through the monsters, and Purga is glad to finally have someone take on the small monsters. Purga's second in command goes into berserk mode and using his giant axe slashes the chief monster in the ankle. Instead of preparing himself for another attack, he starts laughing, declaring to everyone that he has done something magnificent. However, this earns him his death as the chief monster kicks him in the chest and sends him into the wall. This takes down the last of Purga's men, and Purga looks around in complete shock because all of his supporters are now dead. He knows that even if he manages to survive, his political career is gone just because of the chief monster. Purga finally loses it, and he hurls his weapon at the monster, and before it can react, he catches it again. He unleashes a fast-paced attack that cuts through the monster's arm before going for the head. Purga puts his all into the attack and unleashes a powerful attack that cuts through the monster's hand into its chest. Purga celebrates, believing that he has won, but in that moment of distraction, the monster impales him with its left hand. Purga's chest is shattered as his blood splatters everywhere, leaving him to wonder where it all went wrong. While still holding on to Purga, the chief monster urges Turan to reveal himself. Unknown to the chief monster, Turan is in the opposite direction from where he is looking. Turan is surprised that even after wiping out Purga's men, the chief monster is still out for blood. Out of nowhere, Turan appears above with a giant axe, which he swings directly at the monster's head, and before the chief monster can react, the attack lands. However, Turan's attack still couldn't cut through the monster's neck in one swing. Nonetheless, it leaves a massive gash in its neck that causes him severe pain. The monster angrily swings at Turan, sending him into the distance. The shield around him is crushed, and seeing how things have turned out, Turan realizes that he still lacks the destructive power to take on the monster. Turan then decides to do what he has been holding back on. He grabs the holy relic to drink the mana stored in it. The monster rushes toward him, taking a swing at him, but Turan already drinks from the holy relic. He is able to dodge the strike, and an overwhelming amount of power surges through his body. Using his new strength, Turan delivers a powerful swing at the monster's body that cuts deeper than his previous attacks. The chief monster screams out in pain, while cursing Turan out for killing all of his children. Turan leaps backward to leave the monster to suffer the pain of his last attack. The monster falls to its knees, coughing up blood incessantly while threatening to kill Turan. However, Turan already has the edge, and since the monster is already on its knees, it gives Turan the chance to deliver the final blow, ultimately cutting off the monster's head, splashing a large amount of blood on the floor. Turan crashes down, panting heavily after he just survived a near-death experience. He realizes that he would have been done for if not for the power of the history bloodline that he got from Dolph. With this, he has learned that the power of the Mimic is working with the Holy Relic, but still has to confirm the Wave Rider bloodline later on. However, he is a bit disgusted that he had to drink the liquid from the Holy Relic. Just then, he notices that the power surging through his body is already fading, and it will completely vanish in about 30 minutes. Turan gets up to check on Purga, and he realizes that with the type of hole in his body, there is no way he is surviving. Purga coughs up blood while straining himself to beg Turan to save him. Turan offers his sincerest apologies, telling Purga that what he is asking for is beyond his abilities. Purga continues begging to be saved until he finally gives up the ghost, dying on the spot. After Purga's death, Turan begins to absorb their mana. Even though Purga is a piece of trash who treats commoners badly, Turan is impressed that he was able to fight against the monsters of the labyrinth until the very end. Turan promises Purga that he will always remember him, and with this, Turan takes in all the mana. The Holy Relic is also able to store a variety of mana from different bloodlines, and this leaves Turan wondering what it would be like to use the powers of multiple bloodlines at once. Even though he is curious, he decides to save them till the time comes. Turan notices that he has gotten twice as strong compared to when he first entered the labyrinth. Seeing the amount of power running through him, he realizes that some nobles would not even reach his level in their entire lifetime. Turan then decides to leave the magic tools behind to avoid being chased by Zahar's pursuers. At the same time, he runs around the labyrinth, cleaning up his presence from his blood down to his footprints to make it seem like he was never there. Turan then returns to the door to inform it that he has killed the chief monster. The door doesn't respond, and Turan just pushes the door open himself. He is led into a room where there is a throne room with 2 knight statues standing guard. There is also a vortex in the room, and Turan figures out that it is the exit. Turan walks to the throne, and he finds a book beside the throne, which is about an experiment to recreate the job advancement process for the Night Hunter. Turan is taken aback when he sees this, and upon opening it, he realizes that the Night Hunter is basically a combination of hunter, pursuer, shadow, and alchemist. Basically, the job advancement condition is clearing the labyrinth of evil, and a function to tempt only the target was added to it. Turan finally understands why he suddenly felt the urge to enter the labyrinth earlier on. He continues reading and notices that the monsters were created using a giant's flesh, with their power source being mana. He reads further and notices that the previous experiment had failed. He soon realizes that his head is spinning from trying to understand everything at once, but he can see that the creator's goal was to produce a Night Hunter. Since he had the Holy Relic with him, the labyrinth mistook him for a candidate with all bloodlines, and it accidentally opened the door. Talking about the Shadow and Alchemist bloodlines, they have been wiped out by the Zahar family long ago, so they are basically extinct. Turan remembers that Orville, the Burner, also tried to artificially obtain a bloodline after claiming that a god told him how to do it. This leaves Turan wondering if it is actually possible to permanently acquire a bloodline with artificial means, since there are holy relics that can absorb and use the power of bloodlines. Since he can't get an answer to all the questions he has, Turan figures out that it is better he leaves the labyrinth before the vortex disappears. Turan jumps into the vortex and he appears on the outskirts of the region. He then reunites with his eagle, who expresses his worries that something happened to Turan after days of disappearance. Turan pets the eagle, apologizing for making it worry. Turan then carries his backpack, and the eagle flies him out of there. He knows that he is going to be the prime suspect for Purga's death, so it is better if he leaves the Enril desert for a few months until things quiet down. Turan then points in the direction in which he wants the eagle to go. Soon afterward, Turan arrives in a cold region, which is known as the Grey Zone. It is the place where Arabian and Zahar met in battle. Turan notices that some of the residents are leaving, and he figures out that they are running away from something. Turan then heads to the Grey City called Kalamap, which sits on a hill. Upon arriving at the city gates, the guards stare at him with curiosity since he has an eagle sitting on his shoulder and his mode of dressing is quite different. However, from a closer observation, the guards notice that he is a wizard and they immediately bow to him, asking him which house he originated from. Turan is surprised that they have already figured out that he is a wizard, and because of this, Turan concludes that he would have to get himself cotton clothes to wear. Turan tells the guards that he is just a passing traveler, and he asks them if he could see the master of the city because he would like to stay for a day. Just then, the guards shock him by telling him that Kalamap currently has no lord presiding over it. Turan is shocked to hear this, and the guards inform him that the lord recently passed away, fighting the dark elves that invaded from the west. In fact, It is so much worse that there is no single knight or noble left in the city. Turan hears this and admits that it is a difficult situation, and suddenly, the leader of the guards goes down on his knees to ask Turan for something he never expected. The dude throws a huge responsibility at him, asking him to become the lord of the city, and this shocks Turan down to his bones. Turan hesitates to respond to the request because he doesn't want to be tied down to a place like this, but since he can't just ignore the people after seeing their pitiful state, Turan decides to hear them out first before deciding his next move. The man is happy to hear this and later leads Turan inside, where he narrates that their trouble started 3 weeks ago when monster hunters were found dead on the road west of the city. The hunters were battered so badly that even their weapons were cut clean through by a single strike. From this description, Turan figures that whatever did that must not be an ordinary beast. The man then continues as he recounts that the city sent 2 knights to check out the situation since it was only a day's journey, but 3 days passed and the knights didn't return. Afterwards, they decided to send the house head's brother, his son, and 10 more knights, but in the end, none of them ever returned to the city. Turan then asks him if the house head stepped in himself, and the man answers that he did. However, according to him, the house head also went missing, and only a severely battered knight returned barely alive, and just before he took his last breath, the knight uttered the word wraith. Turan is surprised to hear this, as the man further adds that some scholar told them that controlling wraiths is something only dark elves can do. Apparently, the scholar warned them that the dark elves would soon swarm the city and devour the people, which is why everyone decided to flee the city. Turan wonders if they contacted other neighboring cities for help, and the man tells him that they sent several messengers but only received rejections from the other cities, who claimed they couldn't spare any forces in such perilous times. Turan concludes that the cities were simply afraid of suffering losses themselves, which is selfish, but he can't really blame them since it was a logical human response. Even so, he tells the man that despite understanding the city's desperate situation, it would be difficult for him to offer any help. The man quickly bows to the ground as he begs Turan to reconsider, telling him that the weak sheep need a shepherd to watch over them. These words immediately remind Turan of his mother, who used to say the exact same thing. Curious, he asks whether the metaphor is commonly used around there, and the man replies that it is a well-known saying throughout the gray zone. Reciting it almost word for word as Turan's mother once did, he says that nobles are the shepherds, knights are the sheepdogs, and commoners are the sheep. He further adds that the rule is that the sheep follow the sheepdogs, while the sheepdogs obey the shepherd and protect the flock. These words instantly convince Turan that his mother must either be from around here or have stayed here for some time, since he had never heard the same saying in Hisaril or the desert. Turan then shows the man a portrait of his mother, asking if he has seen her face around here. He also adds that her name is Vie, and she should have been in her late teens or early 20s about 20 years ago. The man takes a close look at the drawing and apologizes as he tells Turan that he's not sure if he has seen her before. However, he suggests distributing the drawing throughout the city to get a wider audience. From the expression on the man's face, Turan immediately figures that the man wants to make a deal with him to help the city if he wants to find his mother. Realizing he has no choice but to comply, Turan lets him know that he can't be the lord of the city, but he can at least be their protector. The man is pleased to hear this. After all, the protector sounds more reassuring than the master of the city. But just in case the man might misunderstand him, Turan explains that his role is only to temporarily stay and protect the city until the threat is eliminated and a suitable lord takes over. Shortly after their meeting, the people of the city gather to meet their new protector, and while some are excited to finally have a so-called savior descended from the gods to save them, others are skeptical because Turan looks way too average to be a hero. Someone admits that Turan is as handsome as the Freyans, but his pretty face can't exactly chase away the monsters plaguing them. The man who begged Turan earlier to help them is livid when he hears this and admonishes them, but Turan isn't annoyed because he knows they are right. Besides, he could tell from their eyes that they're not mocking him, but are only anxious since they don't want to be disappointed again. Turan now understands that Badal's display back then with the lightning wasn't some simple show of power, but a strategic event to reassure the people. To make his sheep feel at ease, Turan decides to show them how strong their shepherd is. Everyone watches in amazement as Turan unleashes a powerful flame into the night sky, but he doesn't just stop there. Knowing there's no other wizard in the city or nearby, he decides to put on a big show decent enough to reassure the people. With that, he compresses the flames into a giant ball of fire, and after lowering the temperature, he launches the fireball deep into the sky. As the fireball explodes, expanding the range of effect, everyone takes cover to prevent being blown away by the shockwave. The people are left stunned as the fire takes over the whole sky, making it seem as though the sky is on fire. Thankfully, Turan's powerful show works magic on the people as they begin to cheer for him, convinced he's definitely powerful enough to save them. Turan is also satisfied with the results, but a few hours later he begins to regret his decision to play savior as he is left with a ton of work to do. Apart from that, he's stuck in an endless meeting with the officials arguing about several things concerning the city's welfare. Fed up with endless bickering, Turan decides to speak up to prevent having to sit through the same meeting until the next day. He then announces that he will solve the city's shortage of food by himself, leaving the officials speechless. After an awkward silence, one of them gently asks him how he plans to do that, and Turan confidently tells them that he will herd the surrounding animals into the city. He further explains that some of the meat from the animals will be used to make meat stew, while the rest will be salted and stored to carry the people through winter. The officials are amazed by Turan's humble attitude as they complain that they don't want him doing such lowly work with powers granted by the gods. However, Turan reminds them that nobles in the north also strike the ground with lightning after harvest to make the land more fertile, so what he's planning to do is no different from them. Later that night, Turan's eagle flies him over the mountains where he uses animal control magic to command all the surrounding animals to move towards the city gate. He also orders them to stop and stay still once they arrive in front of the city wall. After the command is issued, a massive herd of different species of animals begins trooping in the same direction, like sheep to a slaughterhouse. Despite the large-scale animal control magic used, Turan remains unaffected because he's already used to doing it back home with his sheep, even though this time he admits that it's somewhat more tiring than usual. Meanwhile, back at the city's gate, everyone watches in shock as a large herd of different animals flocks towards them. Someone even remarks that the previous city lords should have pulled something like this instead of letting them starve. But his neighbor lets him know that Turan is much more powerful than the previous lord, reminding him about the burning sky incident. Shortly afterwards, the men in the city help slaughter the animals and dry out their hides, while Turan orders the officials to open up the city lord's mansion to accommodate those whose homes have been destroyed. The officials are puzzled as they wonder where Turan is supposed to stay if he gives up his house to others. They are surprised when Turan assures them that the lodging provided by the city hall should be enough for him since it already has a bed. Soon afterward, the homeless people are resettled into the mansion. While settling in, they begin chanting Turan's praises, calling him a shepherd who pities his sheep and watches over them. They also praise him for practically carving off his own flesh to feed them, making Turan sound like a god. However, as Turan listens to them chant, he admits that he has no intention of being worshipped like a god, and he's only doing all this to find his mother, knowing that it won't be possible until the city regains its stability. Meanwhile, news about Turan's achievement spread throughout other cities like wildfire, earning him the title Turan of Calamap. Several city lords have heard that he's now sending merchant groups to start trading with surrounding villages. Several big families like the Biggin Castle were beginning to show interest in everything concerning him, especially his age. At Balan Castle, a messenger reports Turan's display of flames to the head of House Balan. Upon hearing the news, the house head concludes that someone as young as Turan possessing such overwhelming power must either be lucky or a talent deliberately raised by one of the great houses. At Haran Castle, the house head finds it suspicious that Turan suddenly appeared so close to the Arabian army and took over an almost empty city. He then tests Turan's name against the Zahar name and concludes that it has a nice ring to it, making him wonder if Turan is a talent sent by Zahar. Upon hearing this, the house head's aide wonders if they should contact Zahar to find out the truth. However, the house head rejects the idea, fearing they may be punished for guessing their superior's intentions. He then advises his aide to just pretend to accept Turan without getting too close in case they are wrong about him being from House Zahar. Meanwhile, back in the gray zone, Turan is minding his business when his ears begin to itch. And just like that, no one made any trouble for him as the surrounding masters of the gray zone decided to let him run wild as the protector of Calamap. After a while, things finally settled down in the city, and Turan focused his efforts on finding his mother. However, he worries that the odds of finding his mother are low with so many villages and cities to search. Just then, the man who promised to help him spread the portrait arrives with another report about his mother, but apologizes for only bringing false news over the past week. However, he reassures Turan that this new report is a little different, even though it's from a vagrant named Egon. The man explains that Egon reported that he met a woman resembling Turan's mother 18 years ago at the inn he used to run. Turan notes that this news might be accurate since it coincides with the specific timing. A few minutes later, Egon is brought before Turan, and he kneels to the ground, thanking Turan for providing him with food and lodging, or he might have died on the streets like a dog. Turan is relieved to hear that he's doing well, and then proceeds to ask him to give a detailed story about when he met the woman in the portrait. Egon then begins to narrate that he met her when he was still running a proper inn, before he lost everything. According to Egon, Turan's mother came to his inn to lodge for the night, and back then, Calamap was in chaos due to the war between Arabian and Zahar. Egon remembered her face, because back then, he was wondering why a young woman would be alone in such turbulent times. He guessed she was around 20 and might have been pregnant because he noticed her belly was a little swollen. Apart from traveling alone, she also had a large and fine horse with her, which stuck in his memory. Egon also tells Turan that it was as if she were running from something because she looked anxious, which made him wonder what kind of scumbag would abandon a pregnant beauty like her. Turan wonders why Egon would think that the woman was abandoned, and Egon explains that he overheard her muttering something to herself, and when he listened closely, she was telling her unborn baby not to become like his father. Upon hearing this, Turan instantly realizes that the woman in Aegon's story was definitely his mother. Aegon then continues to recount that back then, the woman asked him for directions to the west, but since she didn't know the exact name of a single place around, he figured she wasn't from around here. He also recalls that her horse stood out with a shiny golden coat, which made him tightly lock up the stables for fear that it might be stolen. That night, after meeting with Aegon, Turan can't stop thinking about everything he heard, but he decides not to jump to conclusions too soon. However, something tells him that the woman from Aegon's story was certainly his mother. He also can't help but wonder what his mother meant when she was telling him not to turn out like his father. Just then, Turan's thoughts are interrupted by scribbling sounds as the eagle scribbles a few words on the sandboard, asking him if it hurts. Turan replies that he isn't hurt, but his head is a bit cluttered with thoughts. The eagle then writes that Turan seems to suffer when talking about his mother, Vijay. Turan is surprised that the eagle knows this, but he quickly realizes that it must be because their souls are connected, so the eagle is sensitive to his feelings. Nonetheless, Turan admits that the painful feelings are connected to his mother. Curious, he asks the eagle if it remembers its own mother, but the bird simply replies that it doesn't know and has never had one. Feeling a pang of sympathy, Turan gently rubs the eagle's head as he says they're actually quite alike, since his own mother has been gone for a long time. Moved by his words, the eagle suddenly declares that its name is Vijay, leaving Turan completely stunned and confused as he wonders what it means. But as the eagle continues to insist that its name is Vijay, only then does Turan realize it wants to become Vijay in Turan's mother's absence. Even so, he gently advises the eagle to think more carefully before deciding on such an important name. However, the eagle insists that it has thought about it for a long time and truly wants to be called Vijay. Seeing how determined it is, Turan finally accepts its decision. Overjoyed to have its new name, Vijay happily flaps her wings and hops around excitedly while Turan also acknowledges her new name. Afterwards, Turan decides it's time for them to head out for a recon mission, and a few minutes later, Vijay flies out with Turan on her talons. As the duo set off, the people below cheer for Turan, singing his praises as their protector and asking him to protect Calimap forever. Turan doesn't know how to feel when he overhears the forever part because he's planning to leave the city once things settle down. Turan remembers that this whole getting too attached thing is the major reason why he wanted to avoid settling down anywhere in the first place. After flying across the city, Vijay heads into the mountain area surrounding the city. There, Turan uses search magic to survey the area, but finds no trace of dark elves anywhere around, making him wonder whether they decided to move elsewhere. Turan realizes that this is a major issue for him because repelling enemies he can see is easy, but if they've moved elsewhere, it means they could always come back without warning, which would ruin his plans of leaving. Just then, Turan suddenly senses mana twice as strong as his coming from afar, making him wonder if it belongs to a wraith or a wizard. As Vijay heads in that direction to check it out, the person suddenly speeds up. Turan figures that they must have noticed him, but he's surprised that they saw him from such a far distance. He then orders Via to fly south, but suddenly realizes that the person's flight pattern feels quite familiar. After looking closely at it, he notices a dark red lock of hair floating behind them as Masa suddenly appears in front of him. She calls out to him, pointing out that it's been a while since they last met. Shortly afterwards, the duo settles on the ground to catch up, and Mesa remarks that Turan looks different even though it's only been roughly 4 months since they parted ways. Turan admits that he has indeed changed a lot, and after studying him more closely, Mesa tells him that he looks more like an adult now. Vijay then scribbles on the snow, asking Turan about Mesa's identity, and Turan explains that Mesa is a good friend of his. He then introduces Via to Mesa as his family, and Mesa wonders if Via is a soul-bound monster. She is also impressed that Via can actually communicate so clearly. Turan tells Mesa that he stumbled across Via during his journey, and she was the one who chose him. Mesa finds this rather romantic as she comments that she also always wanted such a companion for herself. Mesa then asks Turan what brings him to a dangerous place like this and points out that it isn't exactly a good place for a vacation. After hearing all about the city, Mesa blames her army for the city's troubles. She explains that a wraith sorcerer managed to escape their notice when the Arabian forces destroyed the underground kingdom. Turan begins to suspect that the sorcerer is the one behind the series of mysterious attacks. Mesa confirms his suspicion, explaining that the sorcerer is likely trying to replenish his army of wraiths. She also reveals that there's a strong possibility he's currently hiding within the settlements of the blind dwarves deep in the mountain range. Turan is stunned by the revelation and asks if she's referring to the legendary blind dwarves. Mesa nods, explaining that, according to ancient legends, their settlements lie so deep beneath the mountains that not even the gods were able to completely subjugate them. Mesa expresses her relief that the sorcerer didn't head further east, as she explains that her army can't enter that part of the gray zone due to certain circumstances. Turan guesses it must be because of Zahar, and Mesa confirms his suspicions, after which she decides to leave since she has been away from camp for too long. As she takes off into the sky, Mesa tells Turan to give her the full details about his travels the next time they meet. Once she leaves, Via begins to scribble on the snow again, telling Turan that her insides match Mesa's. Stunned by this revelation, Turan asks if Via would choose her if she hadn't already picked him. Vijay is taken aback by the question, but quickly assures Turan that Misa has no chance since she already chose him. She then reassures him that she's happy with her choice. Even so, Turan can't help but wonder why he and Mesa are the only match for Via out of everyone else. As the atmosphere in the city begins to stabilize, trouble comes knocking when Turan is informed that he has noble visitors who came in a large group. A few minutes later, the visitors from several noble houses appear before Turan, claiming to be a joint delegation from all the surrounding cities. After exchanging formal greetings, the visitors politely request permission to remain in the city as honored guests. However, Turan cuts straight to the point, asking why they have really come to see him. Rather than letting everyone speak at once, he tells them to choose a single representative to speak on behalf of the group. An elderly man steps forward and proposes a marriage alliance between Turan and the 7 noble families. He explains that each family is willing to offer one of their daughters as Turan's concubine, claiming it will help strengthen his household and ensure its prosperity. However, Turan sees right through their facade and knows the proposal is just a political move. Now that word has spread that the Western threat has been eliminated, the 7 families have rushed over to secure a piece of the pie and stake an early claim to the city. Turan knows that they're basically trying to seize control of Kalamap. To drive their point home, one of the nobles tells Turan that he will need knights to smoothly govern the territory, and also advises him that mixing his blood through marriage is a good way to solidify their friendship. Without even thinking about it for a moment, Turan thanks them for their so-called kindness, after which he declines the offer. However, he decides to propose another win-win situation for everyone. He then announces that he would give control of the city to anyone who can bring him the most useful information about a certain woman who traveled through the gray zone about 20 years ago. The nobles are taken aback to hear this because it makes no sense that anyone would hand over a whole city for some mere news about a woman. Turan then adds another condition to the deal, telling them that whoever takes over must swear in the name of the Freyans to diligently protect the citizens, or their ruling rights would be revoked if they break the oath. One of the nobles then asks him why he's going to such lengths for mere commoners, even after providing them with enough resources. However, after considering it for a while, Turan can't seem to figure out the reason for his concern. He continues to think about it deep into the night, but still comes up empty. After a while, Turan finally admits that he simply wants to be a good shepherd who protects the sheep and the sheepdogs from the wolves in this harsh world. Turan suddenly senses a strong mana coming from the middle of the city and figures it must belong to a powerful knight. He wonders who it might be, and since they came to the city hall without reporting in, Turan suspects they sneaked into the city. Without wasting another second, Turan rushes towards City Hall to investigate. The moment he lands behind the mysterious figure, he braces himself for a confrontation. However, before he can say anything, the person turns around and Turan is stunned to see that it's none other than his old friend, Kaorn. Korn places his hand on Turan's shoulder, expressing his surprise that the popular Turan of Kalamap is the same Turan he knows. He explains that he had his suspicions, but decided to come to the city just to be sure. Kaorn then clears his throat and humbly greets Turan like a subordinate, but Turan is livid as he begs him to drop the cheesy formality, reminding Kaorn that he isn't into that sort of thing. Kaorn points out that Turan has grown a lot since they last met, yet he doesn't seem to have changed even a bit. Shortly afterwards, Turan takes him to the lodge for tea and to catch up. He then comments that Kaorn must have taken a huge detour from his travels just to drop by to see him. However, Kaorn explains that he didn't simply come to Kalamap because he was traveling. Turan wonders what else he was doing besides traveling, and Kaorn reveals that he actually joined the subjugation force after learning about the war on the Dark Elves. Kaorn tells Turan that he was the one who requested to return to active duty since he has fought the Dark Elves several times before. Upon hearing this, Turan realizes that Kaorn came to see him as an Arabian knight and not just an old friend. After pondering this for a moment, Turan asks him if he mentioned anything about his bloodline to Arabian. Kaorn assures him that he did not because he figured Turan didn't seem eager to live his life as a Zahar noble. Kaorn then asks if he overstepped by putting it that way, but Turan assures him that he's right. He's also convinced that Kaorn didn't lie to him about exposing his identity to Arabian. With that out of the way, Kaorn decides to do his job as an Arabian messenger, revealing that he came on behalf of Mesa to pass a message. Turan wonders if Kaorn is personally acquainted with Mesa, but Kaorn tells him that he's only a little familiar with her because of his previous title. But before he can say any more, Turan reveals that he knows about his identity as the hero Kaorn, leaving him utterly speechless. Kaorn figures that Turan must have discovered his identity from the popular street play. Turan nods in acknowledgement, but Kaorn quickly brushes it off to tell him about Mesa's message. He then reveals that Mesa is requesting Turan's help because her army has run into a major problem with the subjugation mission because of a self-proclaimed Wraith King ruining everything. Turan wonders if this Wraith King is that strong because the king title is only used by ancient rulers. Besides, he already heard that Arabian's army was utterly thrashed, so they had to flee to prevent total annihilation. Kjorn confirms the rumors as he explains that the so-called Wraith King has recently become even more troublesome than they expected. Apparently, they located his hideout and tried to smoke him out, only to suffer a devastating loss themselves. According to Kjorn, their army lost 8 nobles, and roughly about 200 knights died during the attack. Turan is shocked by this revelation as he wonders how such a thing happened in the first place. Kjorn explains that the hidden dwarves' settlement was actually a trap, filled with all kinds of strange and deadly magical devices. Turan finds this hard to believe and wonders if one of the great houses secretly joined forces with another race to create those magic tools, or if everything had been orchestrated by Zahar from the very beginning. However, Kjorn assures him that Mesa already ruled out Zahar from the equation because she thinks whoever is behind this has been excavating and using relics from the ancient dwarves. After thinking everything over, Turan admits that he has one major concern about accepting Mesa's request. He then asks Kjorn if he knows Talis Zahar. Kjorn says he's not entirely sure, but he knows Talis isn't the head of House Zahar. Turan then explains that Talis is actually the second in command of House Zahar and reveals that someone recently pointed out how much the two of them resemble each other. Because of that, Turan worries that someone from the subjugation force may have seen Talis before and could notice the resemblance. However, Kjorn reassures him, explaining that the nobles of House Zahar always wear masks during war, and because of that, it's safe to assume that no one in Arabian knows what they actually look like. Kjorn then asks Turan if Talis is his father, and Turan admits that he isn't sure, which is exactly why he's been investigating his suspicions. Turan then questions why the subjugation force hasn't requested reinforcements from Arabian. Remembering how overwhelming Badal's power was during the lightning show, Turan figures the whole situation could be resolved quickly if someone like him stepped in. However, Kjorn explains that there are 2 major problems with that idea. First, because of the complex layout of the dwarves' lair, sending weaker wizards would only increase the casualty rate. The second reason is that Mesa can't easily ask the main house for help because, as the next head of the family, requesting help could make her appear incapable of handling the situation on her own. Turan feels bad for Mesa as he realizes that she can't just do whatever she wants, even though she has the title of heir. Just then, Turan senses the aura of a holy relic as Kjorn tries to take something out of his pocket. True to his suspicion, Kjorn pulls out a high-capacity pouch and informs Turan that the holy relic is the payment from Arabian. Turan studies the pouch closely as he wonders if it is really what he thinks it is. Kjorn confirms this, but mentions that the storage pouch is the lowest grade and can only hold items about 1,000 times its size without feeling the weight. To test it out, Turan puts a water skin into the pouch and it fits in perfectly without showing any signs that something large was put inside. Turan is very satisfied with this gift because he no longer needs to travel around with a backpack. Afterwards, he then asks Kjorn if they can truly subjugate the Wraith King if he joins the mission. Kjorn simply tells him that Mesa believes it to be possible. Turan is satisfied with this answer, and as he attaches the pouch to his waist, he remarks that he doesn't want Mesa to get hurt. Apart from that, Turan also admits that this will count as a repayment for all the magic she taught him before. Later that night, Turan arrives at the camp with Vie to see Mesa, who asks him if he has decided to help her with the subjugation mission. Turan acknowledges this and points out that Mesa is injured, but she assures him that her injury isn't that serious. Turan wonders if she's not treating the injuries because all their healers are dead, but Mesa explains that the mana available for recovery is limited and there are many others who need the healers more than she does. She then confirms that Kjorn has explained the situation to Turan in detail, after which she announces that they are leaving immediately before the enemy recovers their strength. However, Turan tells Mesa that she also needs to recover from her injuries, but she insists that a few injuries don't make any difference to her. On their way to join the remaining members of the force, they run into her uncle Kadram, who scolds her for bringing a stranger into their camp. Mesa bluntly tells him that Turan is a friend who is also acquainted with Hausberg, and she points out that he's skilled enough for her to entrust him with her safety. Kadram then carefully inspects Turan like a commodity, after which he admits that Turan has enough power, but his lineage is questionable. He then demands that Turan show them his bloodline ability because, for all they know, he could be a spy from Zahar. However, Turan isn't fazed, and despite knowing his questionable origins, he immediately agrees to show them his bloodline ability. Upon hearing this, Mesa and Kjorn are equally uneasy as they wonder how he plans to handle this. With the flick of a finger, Turan then whips up a golden string and picks up a small branch, which he throws into the string. The branch immediately melts away the moment it touches the string, and after the show, Turan asks everyone if they're satisfied with his power. However, no one seems to be impressed, as one of them mentions that a barrier user like Turan won't be much help to them in a fight. But another noble believes that Turan can pull his weight even without a powerful bloodline ability since he has plenty of mana. What they don't know is that Turan wanted to stay low-key by using an ability that poses no threat to them, yet is useful enough to help out on the battlefield. Apparently, he only pulled it off with one of the mana types he stored inside the holy relic. Mesa then asks the group if anyone still objects to Turan joining them, but when none of them respond, she orders them to go on ahead while she talks to Turan alone. Kaorn also heads back to his post, and once they leave, Mesa uses wind to create a solid barrier around herself and Turan for privacy. Turan is surprised that wind abilities can also be used this way, as he wonders if this means no one outside can overhear their conversation. Misa confirms this, after which she quickly asks Turan how he managed to pull off the ability of a barrier user earlier. She wonders if he succeeded by just practicing, but Turan lets her know that he used a magic tool, though it has too many restrictions, preventing him from freely using it. Mesa then scolds him for not telling her beforehand so that they can get their story straight in advance. Turan explains that he also didn't know that he would use that trick because he came here hoping they would accept him without any questions. Mesa then admits that she was a little surprised and thought Turan had managed to surpass her. Turan jokingly tells her not to be so relieved, but Mesa scoffs, believing there's no way he has caught up to her yet. Soon afterwards, the subjugation force moves out with Misa leading them, and before long, they finally arrive at the dwarves' lair. Turan is utterly stunned by the giant cave towering in front of them, and as they flock into the lair, the knights anxiously prepare for any surprise attacks. From the bloodied tracks on the ground, Turan figures that either the enemies must have dragged several corpses away to turn them into wraiths, or the dark elves used them as food. Even before venturing deep into the lair, Turan senses several strange energy signatures nearby, which he immediately finds unusual. He notes that they feel similar to the monsters from the underground labyrinth, but unlike them, the flames around their heads are twisted together. He also detects the presence of a few dark elves, along with around 20 figures whose brains are glowing with light. From their unique energy, Turan concludes that they must be the wraith sorcerers. As they move deeper into the lair, Misa orders everyone to prepare for contact. The soldiers immediately go on high alert, nervously scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. Suddenly, hundreds of small pods resembling Japanese capsule hotels spring open as monsters emerge from them, manning strange magical devices. They quickly surround Turan and the army, calling them devils and shouting for them to be killed.